Welcome, and thank you for joining us today's event hosted by City and State. For many years, New York has been one of the most diverse and progressive cities in the world. Yet, beneath those labels, we see a city that has seen more and more disparity. The COVID-19 crisis and the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd have exposed a truth that many in power have been unwilling to confront, that years and years of systemic, racially insensitive policies have unduly harmed our communities of color. City and State is proud to present today's virtual event called Economic and Social Equity in New York. Panelists and presenters will examine how New York can create a better culture for diversity in terms of policy, hiring, and procurement. We have some excellent speakers lined up today, and we hope that you enjoy their dynamic discussions. Just a couple of things to note with using Zoom. First, you can change your view to either gallery or speaker view in your top right corner. We encourage everyone to use the chat feature on the bottom right and engage with each other. Please make sure to send your comments in the chat to all attendees and all panelists, as Zoom defaults this to just panelists. This allows for everyone to be able to engage with each other. If you have a question for a panelist or speaker, please submit it to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. Our moderators will get through as many questions as time permits. We want to take this opportunity to thank all our sponsors. Without those support, none of this would be possible. So thank you to the New York City School Construction Authority, TD Bank, and Leverage Assessments. And now, my name is Gregg Bishop. I will be your host for today. I am now the interim director, executive director of Coro New York. And just a little bit about Coro. We are the premier leadership training organization in New York City. You can find more at coro.nyc. And I've been very passionate about focusing on these topics today. So we are very happy, and I'm very happy to be your host. And now I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter. We will have a presentation by Dr. Yvonne Riley-Tepe, the Vice President and Senior Regional Manager of Giving for TD Charitable Foundation, who will be sharing some remarks. Yvonne oversees the philanthropic giving in New York State, Northern New Jersey, and Fairfield County, Connecticut, and is responsible for partnering with organizations that can help open doors for a more inclusive and sustainable tomorrow. Yvonne?
Thank you, Greg. And good afternoon, everyone. City and State, I would like to thank you for gathering this impressive group of speakers today. And we at TD Bank are happy to support conversations like this, which address equity and social equity and economic equity. I'm happy to say that I work for a bank that addresses just that. We at TD understand that if we improve our communities, we all win. Our corporate citizenship platform, which we call the TD Ready Commitment, provides the way for the bank to make lasting and strategic impact. TD recognizes that while the future creates many challenges, it also creates opportunities to those who are confident about their ability to embrace it. At TD, enriching lives is our calling and our social purpose. We are committed to help build an inclusive future where everyone has the opportunity to succeed with confidence. In order to do so, we are working with others in the private, public, and not-for-profit sector to address inequity and to create solutions. We are committed to working collaboratively to drive positive change that will enrich the lives of our customers, communities, and colleagues. We will continue to focus on 4 areas where we believe we have the greatest impact and order and make an impact and to support change, nurture progress, and contribute to making the world around us a better place to live. These distinctive 4 interconnected drivers are financial security, vibrant planet, connected communities, and better health. At TD, we acknowledge that we have a duty to invest in the future of our society, to fund and to actively participate in programs like today's, and we will have the greatest impact that way. On the flip side, if we do nothing to help individuals and society prepare for the future, we risk increasing isolation, inequity, exclusion, and divisions, which have impact on our individual health and security, our community cohesion, and the resilience of our environment. And now, Greg, I have some good news to share. We're in the midst of a grant petition called the TD Ready Challenge, which was launched in 2018. And it is designed to support organizations developing innovative solutions for a changing world. Each year, we make a commitment of 10 million Canadian dollars available for one-time grants. The theme of the challenge is aligned to one of the interconnected drivers of the TD Ready commitment. The focus in 2018 was financial security, in 2019 was better health. And this year, the challenge is focused on nonprofit organizations as defined by Section 501c3 on the IRS tax code, as well as Canadian registered nonprofit organizations. And the Ready Challenge statement surrounds addressing the impact of COVID-19. Because we recognize that COVID-19 is not just a health crisis, it's also a social, economic, and environmental one. The competition launched on June 16th. Applications will be accepted up until August 13th, and the grants range in size this year as opposed to having one grant. We range in size from 350,000 American dollars to approximately 745,000 Americans, so big grants. So we will post information on all of the Ready Challenge in the chat room of this, and we hope that we will spark innovation and encourage all of you to read carefully through the requirements and perhaps to submit an application. With that, I thank you so much for having me, and good day, everyone.
Thank you, Yvonne, and that sounds really exciting. And we thank TD, of course, for all your commitment to addressing this issue. And now please allow me to welcome our keynote speaker, Nupol Kiazolu, the president of Black Lives Matter Greater New York. Nupol is a powerhouse in the field of activism, from being on the front lines of Charlottesville protests to taping "Do I Look Suspicious" behind her hoodie in the wake of Trayvon Martin's death. Nupol is the president of Black Lives Matter Greater New York and founder and CEO of her national campaign, Vote 2000. The Brooklyn native has been a leading voice among Generation Z, focusing on civil rights, domestic and sexual violence, and homelessness. Thank you so much, Nupol, for joining us.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Sorry, I was having some technical difficulties earlier. This whole virtual thing is definitely challenging at times, but thank you guys so much for having me. Again, my name is Nupol Kiazolu. I'm 20 years old. I'm the president of Black Lives Matter Greater New York and founder and CEO of my national campaign, Vote 2000. And I'm super, super excited and honored to be here amongst you guys during these challenging times. And I like to send my deepest wishes to all of your families and wish you guys a safe and healthy rest of the year. So, right now, we're at a standpoint in our country, and we are at a pivotal and revolutionary time. And quite frankly, I never thought that we'd be here at this point today where we're actually coming face to face with the everyday realities that Black people have been talking about for generations. And I believe as tragic as COVID has been, it's also forced millions of people all around the world to come face to face with the realities that are being talked about right now, which is racial injustice. For a long time, Black people were told that we're being dramatic, just forget it, you're making it up. And no one really listened, from Eric Garner to Sandra Bland, Trayvon Martin. All of it to me felt like others viewed it as a fairy tale, something Black people were just making up. And George Floyd's death, his brutal and tragic death, really opened not just a nationwide, but a worldwide conversation on social injustices within the Black community and all across this country and how it impacts the Black community. I've been an activist and organizer since the age of 12 years old. And my push into activism was the tragic murder of Trayvon Martin, like many other young Gen Z activists and organizers. I was 12 years old and a sixth grader in the South in a predominantly white middle school when Trayvon Martin was murdered. And adults have this misconception that young people don't understand what's going on and we're apathetic and we aren't really as politically engaged, but that was the exact opposite, because when Trayvon Martin was murdered, although I was not fully able to articulate how I felt at the time, I knew that I was angry. One, it was wrong. Two, and racism played the major role as to why he was murdered, because I was a young Black man walking down the street. So I decided that I had to do something. And what I did was I held a silent protest at my school the following day. I went to school, I had my gray hoodie on and this message taped to my back, "Do I look suspicious?" And I had Skittles and iced tea in my hand to represent what Trayvon had in his hand at the time that he was murdered. And of course, it did cause a lot of controversy within my school and my predominantly white staff, but nonetheless, I persisted. And the only ally I had at the time was my math teacher, who was a Black woman. And ironically, I got written up by my history teacher the following day. So right before I went to the principal's office, when I was written up, I said, "Hey, Ms. Gibbs, this is what it is. I'm about to get suspended." So this woman literally risked her entire career by marching down to the principal's office with me in solidarity. And we debated back and forth with my principal. And instead of suspending me, he sent me home to do my research and have my case ready for him the following morning. So that's exactly what I did. I went home, I looked up my rights as a middle school student, I looked up my First Amendment rights, and then I came across the case Tinker versus Des Moines. And that is a Supreme Court case, in short, that established the right for students to peacefully organize within school grounds. And that was the focal point of my argument the following morning. And when I went back to my principal's office, once again, my math teacher was standing hand in hand with me with her hoodie on again. We debated back and forth. And once I brought up Tinker versus Des Moines, my principal was like, "How the heck do you know about that at 12 years old?" And I'm like, "You told me to do my research." So that's exactly what I did. And I ended up winning. And then when my teacher and I went to the cafeteria, it was lunchtime by the time we had gotten out of his office. I won the case. We went to the cafeteria, and literally every single student in there had their hoodies on with the same exact message taped to their back. And at that moment, my teacher and I just stood there and cried. And I knew that being an activist and organizer was my calling. And I committed my life to the movement and haven't stopped since. And that moment was so pivotal to me because, in all honesty, like, I was someone that was very bullied growing up. Like, I didn't think I had a voice. I didn't really think people cared much about what I had to say. So to see that I had that much of an impact amongst my peers was astonishing to me. And it just goes to show, like, no matter where you come from, no matter what walk of life you come from, your voice matters. You hold so much power within you. You just have to be the one to believe in yourself and tap into that and charge yourself to the task of being a change maker. And that's when I am a community organizer, activist. And fast forwarding a few years later, I founded my national campaign, Vote 2000, in 2017, which is a national campaign geared towards getting disenfranchised Black and Brown communities registered to vote and educating them on the civic and electoral processes of this country. Because I'm from a disenfranchised community, AKA the Hood. I'm from Brownsville, Brooklyn. You know, and nobody wants to come there, quite frankly. Like, there's a lot of people that speak up on behalf of us, but I can count on my hands how many people actually come to the Hood. And Brownsville is the poorest part of Brooklyn and one of the poorest parts of New York City. So we literally have nothing. We're in a desert. And then, you know, when Black people voice their problems and concerns within their communities, a lot of times Black on Black crime is brought up. And I will argue that Black on Black crime does not exist. Now, what exists, and anyone can take your notes because words are very, very powerful and they have a lot of meaning, especially when you're addressing social issues. So when you're addressing violence, systemic violence within a community, the proper terminology to use is intra, I-N-T-R-A, intra-racial violence. That's how you address the problems going on within communities. Because when white people go and shoot up these churches and create mass shootings, you never hear white on white violence on CNN. Like, you know, it's this narrative of Black on Black crime is used to diminish the everyday struggles that Black people face in this country every single day. And once you bring up Black on Black, and it's just like the entire struggle of what Black people have been facing in this country is just like diminished because you guys kill each other, so we can kill you too. That's literally what it sounds like when you talk about Black on Black.
That's what they're saying.
Exactly. So, one, it's important to note the hypocrisy in that argument, because when you go to these communities that are afflicted by everyday gun violence and systemic violence, you can see every single time that these are overwhelmingly poor communities with no resources. Poor communities with no resources. So it is hypocritical to tell a community to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and work hard when you don't even have the foundation for boots. It's hypocrisy. Like, I tell people to think of it like this. If we're all in a desert and there's one sandwich on that ground, somebody's gonna get hungry. Somebody's going to get hungry, and as the hours go by and as the days go by, the hunger will intensify, and then our human instincts will start coming out. And eventually somebody's gonna have to fight for that last piece of bread. Like, you know, and that's what it is. Like, when you're in a deserted community with no resources, it creates a survival of the fittest mentality. And just then people just have to resort to a means of survival. Like, I don't even call it a life of crime, because if you have a conversation with any of these people don't want to do that. Like, these people don't want to shoot other people. These people don't want to be in gangs, but it's the only means of survival, because we don't even have sustainable wages in one of the most expensive cities to live in, which is New York City. Like, you're paying $1,000 to live in a cubicle. Like, it's insane. So yes, it is important to talk about police brutality, but it's also important to recognize that that's just the tip of the iceberg. We have to talk about the educational disenfranchisement within our community, the lack of jobs and resources, economic disenfranchisement. Like, there's so many levels to this oppression that is just not police brutality. Because I really want to be a part of shifting the national conversation right now from just police brutality to really addressing every single systemic barrier that Black people face in this country every single day. There's no reason. In New York City, I graduated from Nelson Mandela School for Social Justice, which is located in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, inside of Boys and Girls High School. I had more police officers than textbooks. I had more police officers than laptops, decent working laptops at that. Like, it is insanity that Black and brown children in impoverished communities have more access to the criminal justice system and police officers rather than educational tools that would help prepare them for their future. And then you talk about the school to prison pipeline. You're putting police officers into these school buildings, and a lot of times these police officers are locking kids up. And don't let the kid be 18. God forbid they can get a felony, which ruins their whole lives. Like, I have so many friends right now that have gotten felonies within school grounds. So we really have to address these everyday injustices that Black people face on all fronts. And then I'm segueing into sacrifice. And what does that look like in this movement? Young Black organizers like myself have literally given up life as we know it in order to help push this movement forward. I'm currently separated from my family, like many young Black activists and organizers right now, because we're not just fighting racism, we're also still in the middle of a deadly pandemic, one of the worst pandemics in our world history. And right now, as a leader, I had to make the decision to look outside of myself and really recognize that this movement is greater than my individual body. And as an activist and organizer, I remind myself of that every single day, even on my lowest days. Like, this movement is so much greater than me. So what am I willing to sacrifice today to help push this movement forward? Because change cannot come without sacrifice. So I've sacrificed my comfortability. Right now, I have been moving around from in between New York City and other places, place to place, because I can't go home. I am the oldest out of 6 in a single parent household, and my mother has severe asthma. So by me being on the front lines every single day, if I go home, that's putting them at risk. So, you know, by the grace of God, I have been surviving off of community donations and just making it work with what I have. But this is not comfortable. With every situation that I've had in my life and every struggle, I've always had my mom and my 5 younger brothers right next to me. So for the first time in my life outside of going to college, I'm away from my family. And it's hard at times. I'm not going to sit here and act like everything is peaches and cream all the time, but I recognize it's the sacrifice I have to make because, one, I don't want to put my family at risk. It would be very selfish of me to go home after being around thousands of people every single day and subject my mom to that possibility of contracting COVID. So again, looking outside of myself and just overall, like, what are you willing to contribute to this movement? There's so many ways you can get involved, and I recognize that it is a privilege that I have as an able-bodied young person to be on the front lines right now, because a lot of people have predisposed conditions that can't be on the front lines, or just people have different situations. So it's also recognizing the privilege that I have to be able to march every single day and be in the streets and also work behind the scenes. But there is always something you can do, whether it's bring us some food, because I'm telling you, we get hungry out there, water, like snacks, like, you know, if you're an artist, like you can sing us something, like if you spit poetry, like you can spit a poem, like if you play the drums, you can play the drums. Like there's just so many different ways that you can contribute to the movement. And just because you're not on the front lines, like meaning you're marching on the ground with thousands of people, that does not make your work any less valuable. A lot of people struggle with that can't be on the front lines every single day. And I'm just here to reaffirm that it's okay, because everyone has a different situation. But as long as you're contributing, whether you're supporting frontline organizers monetarily, whether you're sending them stuff, whether you're donating to different food initiatives that are helping feed the protesters, there's just always something you can do. So just find where you fit in the movement and don't feel pressured to conform to any standards that people may have for activists and organizers. However you contribute makes you an activist and someone that is supporting the cause. As long as you're using discernment, you're listening to others, and you're looking outside of yourself, like, you'll be fine. But like, I really, really do appreciate the amount of support that the Black Lives Matter movement has received in the last 2.5 months. Like, I never, I cannot emphasize enough. You couldn't have told me 4 months ago that thousands of white folks in Europe will be marching for us. Like, you cannot have convinced me. Like, I have supporters from all around the world that are sending me people from, like, in Venice, like over 50,000 people in Venice marching for Black lives. Like, this is a global movement. This is not just here nationally. And I can honestly say right now in this movement that when people used to ask me who I'm fighting for and why I'm fighting, I would always say, for future generations of young Black people. And so my grandkids don't have to tell me when I'm 80 years old that they're still fighting for the same things I was fighting for at 20, 19, 18, 17. But it's shifted. It's really shifted my perspective, this movement from being locked up in Kentucky. I'm a part of the Louisville 87. For many of you that may or may not know, there was 87 nonviolent protesters that was arrested in Louisville, Kentucky about 2 weeks ago. We were protesting right on the Attorney General's lawn, non-violently, just sitting in, and they arrested us and charged us with a felony and 2 misdemeanors. And they tried to ruin my life, but the felony charge got dropped because we got phenomenal legal aid, and the community really rallied around us. Like, inside, they really tried to mentally break us. Like, they starved us, they didn't feed us, like they didn't provide any proper sanitary precautions while we're in the middle of a pandemic. There were over 20 of us in a cell. Like, they really did a lot to try to mentally break us. But nonetheless, I persisted. And as I was sitting in that cell, it really changed me in ways that I never thought that I would change before. Like, my thought process has even progressed in how I view this. Hashtag good trouble. And I'm not afraid to get arrested again. I mean, if I survived in the Southern jail in Louisville, Kentucky, I feel like I can survive anywhere. But it really, really showed me that I'm not just fighting for the future anymore, but I'm fighting for the present as well. And if we don't take a hold of our present in our current situations, in our current climate, then we won't have a shot at the future. So I'm really, really happy to be a part of this movement and just being a part of this change. And I really want us to keep this going and remember that this is not just a moment, this is a movement. This is not just some protests, or not just something you just show up to and take your pictures to and post on Instagram to look woke. Like, these are people's lives at stake. I'm Black, I'm a Black person fighting for my life. And I'm not just fighting to survive anymore, because I'm tired of surviving. I'm tired of putting "I can't breathe" t-shirts on. I want to breathe. I want my mother to breathe. I want my brothers to breathe. I want every single Black person in this country, in this world, not to just survive, but live and breathe and really have access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. And of course, you know, if we were in a auditorium right now, you would hear the applause. Congratulations to you. There's so much that you have done. I have a couple questions, if you don't mind just answering, because you've been so inspirational. I saw some of the comments in the chat being so impressed with you. And we talked about good trouble. And you know, recently we lost a champion, John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, I need to make sure I give him his credit, who dedicated his entire life to public service and to addressing the very same issues that we're talking about. And one of the things he said in his op-ed was, together you can redeem the soul of our nation. Though I'm gone, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. So let me ask a question in terms of, you know, how do you influence other young people to have that passion and to understand, you know, because I grew up in East Flatbush as well, you know, from Brooklyn. So I know some of our peers, I mean, we're not in the same age group, although sometimes I think I'm still 20. But I remember hanging out on the corners, right? And avoiding NYPD and, you know, shooting fireworks at each other. And there's certain things in our city, in growing up in the city that we're used to. But how do you convince your peers that this is an important cause? Like, how do you get your peers to say, like, you know what, I have a voice, I matter, and I can make that change?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, first and foremost is walking in my truth and being that example. Like, kids in my community everywhere in Brownsville, you go through our Brownsville, they call me BLM. Like, that's my nickname there. Like, because I'm always walking around the community and my paraphernalia. I'm always helping. I'm in the schools. Like, I mentor the children all across Brooklyn. Like, I'm literally that walking example of like being in your truth. And, you know, I was an activist and organizer before it was sexy. Like everybody, you know, is hopping on the wave now, and that's okay. I'm all for a good social trend as long as you're in it for the right reasons. But people can attest to my track record. For years, I have been an organizer on the front lines in the Brownsville community and across New York City. So the kids know, and like, I remember sometimes, like, you know, I would get bullied for being an activist and organizer, like, because it always wasn't cool. But like later on down the line, like my peers, like, damn, like we done said all this to her and she's still going. Like people be like, wow, you are really still going regardless of what people have to say. And it inspires others, even the haters. It even inspires the haters. It's like, damn, like she's being her true self. I can be my true self as well. And I've even had that from people in high school that used to pick on me for the work that I do. They come back now and they tell me how proud they are of me. We're still going and being that example and that light within our community, because it's a lot of darkness that goes on. But, you know, just telling young people in my community, like, you can be whoever you want to be. And Blackness is not a monolith, and there's not one way to be successful in Black. You don't have to be an athlete or an entertainer or a singer, although those are great things. I'm not knocking those professions, but that's what the media shows us. Like, you only have worth as a Black person in this country if you check one of those boxes. And I'm here to say, I don't check any of those boxes, and I don't aspire to check anyone's box. I'm creating my own story, and I'm taking control of my narrative so no one else writes my book.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So today we're talking about economic and social equity, and I'm glad that you mentioned like words matter. And when we talk about equity, you know, I participated. You know, I'm the interim executive director for Coro New York City. It's a leadership center in New York City, and we bring the public sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector together to attack some of these challenges. One of the programs we have is called Leadership New York, and one of the modules in that program is to actually talk about power and privilege, and talk about, you know, how do you look at equity, and how do you look at your privilege, and how do you become an ally? And one of the things that we recognize is that there are some people that it will take, you know, 10 steps to get to the front of the room. There are some people, because of their privilege, it only takes 2, and you really need to turn around and figure out how to help others to take those additional 8. That's how you become an ally. Now, we have seen, and you've talked about the fact that, you know, Black Lives Matters now have a number of allies, international allies, political allies, et cetera. And we've seen, you know, the go-to right now for our elected officials is to paint Black Lives Matter on the streets. But what do you want to see elected officials do? I mean, it's great that they're painting that on the street, but murals come and go, right? What if you had a policy, you know, if you had a choice right now, what would be one of the top, you know, 2 or one policy that you'd want to see elected officials focus on to address the equity issue?
Yeah, so absolutely, that's a great question. What I've been fighting for years within New York City is to allocate resources back to the communities. Like, we're not asking for murals, like those are nice, but we're really asking for resources and sustainable change, not anything performative. And we also have to recognize that it is not enough to charge an individual cop and arrest and put them in jail. Like, you know, that helps that one individualized situation of police brutality, but it's more than that. You cannot change a system by just putting that one person in jail. We have to literally deconstruct and reconstruct this system because it's not working. We can't afford to put in reforms anymore. Reforms are not working. There have been so many reforms proposed and some passed, and we're still here. And I really hope that people are starting to recognize that it is not enough to just reform anymore. And you know, when we talk about, this is like a touchy subject for some, abolishment. Now, when people hear the word abolish, they get really scared because it's a provocative word. But literally, in the most literal sense, abolish means to get rid of something that does not work and replace it with something that does. Now, I'm assuming we're all adults here and we've been in relationships. So I'm sure a lot of y'all abolished a lot of relationships in the past and replaced it with something that worked. That's all it is. Like, that's literally all it is. And like, when I talk about abolishment, like, I'm not talking about anarchy. Like, we just get rid of everything and everybody's like going nuts. Like, that's not what it means. I'm really just saying this is not something that can happen overnight. This is something that can happen through legislation and policies and the community advocacy, like putting in substantial resources so it will push out the negative effects and impacts that we've been dealing with. So overall, like what I've been championing right now is fighting for resources, fighting for more funds to come back into the school systems, fighting for more funds to come back into community-based organizations. Like, there's so many young activists and organizers like myself in these disenfranchised communities that have so much to offer, but we don't have the funds to really carry it out in the way that it could be the most impactful. So like literally right now, like everything for me is grassroots. Like, I don't take corporate money or any of that. So I'm literally relying on the community, and a lot of the community is poor, but they're still giving, you know, a few dollars to help like with the initiatives within my community. But right now, like Vote 2000 is about to revamp in 2 weeks. And I'm about to start a fundraiser to help like expand this again, because in 2018 we partnered up with DoSomething.org and got over 100,000 young people registered to vote, and I want to expand that. And the goal of Vote 2000 is to really tap into the people that are most overlooked when it comes to these conversations. Like when we talk about youth civic engagement, a lot of times we're only talking about young college educated people like myself. And I want to change that. I want to go back and continue to go back into communities that need it the most. So yeah, overall, just fighting for resources within our communities. That's the most important thing to me. And that's what will radically change what our communities look like. And our government and our elected officials, they know this. This is not rocket science. It's not something that is out of this world. Poverty and crime have a direct relationship. So if you give resources to the people that need it the most, it will decrease the crime. So yeah, that's what I'm looking at right
now. So I love the fact that you talked about Vote 2000, and one more question, and this has been so enlightening to see, you know, someone who's so passionate about change, because change is, as you said, is difficult, but it's much needed. Vote 2000, when you look at you know, for example, Congressman John Lewis, he talked about giving a little blood for the right to vote, right? You talk about all the civil rights leaders of the 60s. Over the past 40 or 50 years, some may say we've gotten complacent. When you look at the voting record in New York City, it's dismal. Less than 20% of the eligible voters actually go out and vote. And as you just rightfully talked about, when you're talking about even local races, when you're talking about mayor, when you're talking about city council,
important. Local policy.
It's the most important, because they're the ones that are directing funding. Next year, in 2021, the city council, over 35 of the 51 members will turn over. How do you, and what do you envision in terms of getting that message out, not only to the young people that can vote and may have lost faith in government and may be, you know, I've done voter registration drives, and I know how difficult it is to convince people to actually register. We have a dismal response rate in our census. We're only 51% of the city's population has actually responded to the census. And some of that is because people have lost faith in government. Like, what's your message to get people excited about government, or restore faith in government?
Yeah, you know, first and foremost, especially within our community, it's important to highlight that people aren't just disillusioned from getting involved in civics because it's boring, but we also have to look back again on the system. When you look in inner city schools, majority of inner city districts around the country have had civics removed from their schools, especially within New York City. I've never taken a civics class, and then when we talk about civics in school, it's usually like one course on government, like branches of government, but it never really gets in depth, and they never really tell you the impact of your vote and how important it is. You know, it really frustrates me as a young Black person in this country when I hear people saying their vote doesn't matter, but I also have to highlight the fact that a lot of people have not had access to the information as to why their vote is so important. Because if your vote wasn't important, then there wouldn't be so many systems in place to disenfranchise it.
Absolutely.
So, to answer your question, because I didn't feel like I answered it in its entirety, really just having those heart-to-heart conversations. Like when I first started Vote 2000 in 2017, on the last day of the voter registration drive at my school, an influx of graduating high school seniors came down to the library to get registered to vote. And a lot of them were like, oh my gosh, we already did this. We already voted for the president. And when somebody said that, I was like, a light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, yes, the president is important. But for example, we vote to elect the district attorney.
Mm-hmm.
That will literally determine whether or not you walk free if you get involved in the criminal justice system. So, and I'm like, people have shed too much blood within our community for us not to take advantage of this right, because it's not a privilege, it's definitely a right. So, you know, I just gave him that little lecture, and it was like, you know what, miss, you're right. I'm like, miss, I'm younger than y'all. Like, I was only a junior at the time, but it's really just talking to them, just talking to a lot of times people in the hood, like, nobody wants to talk to us. I'm like, we don't bite, I promise. Like, the stuff you see on TV is not even how it is in real life. So just really treating those people like human beings and having the heart-to-heart conversations, and people that look like you and like show that they care. Like, we're oftentimes more accepting as more receptive rather as human beings. So yeah, just mobilizing people within your community that care about it. And like in terms of movements, like movements did not just come out of nowhere. Like everybody got on board. Like this is something that people had to work for. So like maybe one person or a small group of people had an idea, and then it passed on to another person and another person, and another person, and then ultimately it sparked that movement. Mm-hmm. So I would say just continuing the work even when it's not easy.
That's amazing. Nupol, I want to thank you so much. You know, one of the things that we're going to be talking about in some of the next sessions is about, you know, policy. It's about, you know, hiring practices. It's about procurement. But one of the things that you touched on, though, and I just wanted to wrap up with this one, is technology, right? You talked about the digital divide. You talked about the fact that, you know, there may not, you know, in my previous role in the city as Commissioner of Small Business Services, we made a lot of investments in Brownsville on Belmont Ave and made in Brownsville. And I know that, you know, they're doing a lot there. But the question about, you know, the digital divide and how you use technology, like how do you use social media? There are over, you know, almost 400 people in this room who are interested in this topic. Like how does technology play a role in getting your message out?
Oh, like literally it's everything. Like I have over 20,000 followers on Instagram, and I use that community. Like this community is new. Like I haven't always been verified on Instagram and had like a lot of followers. But I definitely appreciate it. And originally when the movement first, like the uprisings first started, I had around 7,800 followers. And then like as the work that people just started catching on to the work I've been doing, and then I went viral like at least 3 times, like within the past 2 months.
Congratulations.
Like, thank you. It's been really crazy. People just started catching on. And originally when I went to Minneapolis, I'm like, okay, this is really hard as an organizer to keep posting material on my feed back to back. And on Instagram, we have something called the swipe up feature. So when you have 10,000 followers or you have a blue check, then you're able to post multiple actions on your page, on your Instagram story, which will then direct people to how to get involved in that action. And it makes it my life much easier as an organizer to do that, as opposed to posting things back to back on my feed, because people will miss it because it won't gain as much traction through the Instagram algorithms. So I connected with different organizers and influencers. I'm like, hey, like, can you help me get to 10K? And they just started like a whole social media campaign to get me to 10,000 followers so I can make my platform as accessible as possible to people. And then like after like I went viral and stuff, and like people see me all around the world, then I got verified and all that other stuff. So it makes my life much easier. But I say all that to say, social media plays like one of the biggest roles in this movement, because we have revolutionized how we use it. Like a lot of adults just thought that young people posted up on social media to look cute and like we're apathetic and we don't care what's going on. Like, but no, like young organizers like myself, we're using this to galvanize millions of people all around the world. Like, this is not just the largest civil rights movement in US history. This is the largest civil rights movement in world history. Like, and we've been able, as Gen Z activists and organizers, Black Gen Z activists and organizers, we've been able to galvanize millions of people through social media, and especially Instagram. Instagram is my favorite platform because it's definitely more interpersonal for me and it works better for me than Twitter. But yeah, like you guys can find me on social media with my first name, Nupol, NUPOL_justice. And then you'll get more of a feel of how like I organize every single day on social media. So yeah,
Awesome.
use that.
Nupol, thank you so much for the inspiring words. Thank you for just having this great conversation.
No problem.
You know, keep up the good fight and creating good trouble, and all the best.
Thank you guys so much. I'm gonna drop my Instagram right in the chat so you guys can see it.
Awesome.
Thank you guys for having me.
And thanks everyone for joining us. As a reminder, we are talking about economic and social equity. And we want to thank our sponsors, the New York City School Construction Authority, TD Bank, and Leverage Assessments. I'm your host, Gregg Bishop, and I am now pleased to move into the conversation with our first panel, Building a Better New York. For many years, New York has been one of the most diverse and progressive cities in the world. Yet beneath those labels, we see a city that has grown more and more unequal, from policies related to housing, education, health, policing, economic opportunities, and more. These vibrant and valuable communities have been disadvantaged and left behind. Our panel of experts will analyze strategies for creating a culture of diversity through recruitment and hiring strategies, social media campaigns, corporate diversity programs, and more. We will also examine public and private investment and new ideas that will better the community for communities of color. Here is our moderator, Sheryl Huggins Salomon, Communications Director at NYU McSilver Institute for Poverty, Policy, and Research. Sheryl.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Gregg. And I also want to thank our keynote speaker, Nupol Kiazolu, for setting the stage for this conversation, which will be about ways we can get to equity, especially economically. Our nation's twin pandemics, COVID-19 and racial injustice, collided this spring. Black and brown communities were hit disproportionately hard, not only in terms of who is infected and who dies from COVID-19, but also in terms of who lost their livelihoods and their homes. This growing poverty is something that greatly concerns us at the NYU McSilver Institute, where I work. But for a second here, I just wanted to give you what the numbers show. From February to May, the city's unemployment rate shot up from 3.4%, which was a historic low, to 18.3%, according to the Center for New York City Affairs. As we know, it's always higher in community of colors, but still that is a really big jump. And then in May, unemployment rates were twice as high for Black, Latinx, and Asian New Yorkers as they were for white New Yorkers. This is according to the city's comptroller office. And according to a University of California, Santa Cruz analysis, 40% of Black business owners, 32% of Latinx business owners, and 26% of Asian-owned business owners nationwide said they were not working during the month of April. And this was compared to only 17% of white business owners. In a comptroller office's survey last month of more than 500 city-certified minority and women-owned businesses, 85% said they cannot survive for 6 more months, even though half had been in business for more than 10 years. And of 622 contracts the city gave businesses for pandemic-related goods, only 1% went to Black-owned firms, according to Crain's New York Business. 1.3%, not much more, went to Latinx-owned firms, and 2.5% went to Asian-owned firms. So clearly there's a problem. Now, last week, Mayor de Blasio signed an executive order requiring all city agencies to appoint a chief diversity officer and use minority and women-owned businesses to procure goods and services valued up to $500,000. So that's a step in the right direction. But today we're here to talk about the many more steps that are needed for equity for New York's communities of color, equity in economic prospects, job prospects, and other areas of life. We'll talk about how these diversity and inclusion efforts can help get us there, but also what it takes to ensure that no community is left behind as New York rebuilds. Now today, our panelists who have taken up the charge are taking up in the legislature, our criminal justice system, transportation, and our business sector. So I'll begin our introductions, and after I have gone through all of the introductions, then they will tell you more about what they do. Good, just making sure we have everyone with us. Wonderful, all right. So State Senator Kevin Parker represents Brooklyn's 21st district, which includes Flatbush, East Flatbush, Midwood, Ditmas Park, Kensington, Windsor Terrace, and Park Slope. A Democrat, he is chair of the Committee on Energy and Telecommunications, and also the first vice chair of the Association of Black, Puerto Rican, and Asian Legislatures. We also have Sandra Jefferson Granum, who is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the New York State Office of the Attorney General. This is a newly created position within the agency. She is charged with ensuring that the agency better reflects the diversity of New York State. We have Michael Garner, who is Chief Diversity Officer of the Metropolitan Transit Authority. His focus is on creating a more diverse transportation industry by empowering minority-owned and women-owned businesses throughout New York State. And we also have Lindsay Greene, who is Chief Strategy Officer of the New York City Economic Development Corporation, where she guides corporate strategy and oversees economic analysis, business development, inclusive job growth, and innovation strategies. So let's jump in. First of all, I'm going to ask everyone to take a minute to tell us about your role in your organization and specifically what it does to further equity. I am first going to ask Senator Parker to answer.
Sheryl, thank you very much for that generous introduction. I appreciate it. Greg, what up, kid? First time I'm seeing you since you abandoned us, but we'll talk about that offline.
Oh, man, all right.
always good to see you.
Good to see you, Senator.
And again, I'm the state senator for the 21st Senatorial District, and I'm the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, but also the majority whip in the New York State Senate. And I think that I always say that my work is two parts, right? It's half legislative and half leadership. Leadership is a lot of stuff we do in the district. Legislatively, my legislative job is two parts, right? It's the budget, which is the third largest budget in the entire country. After the federal government, the state of California, then the state of New York, our budget is approximately $180 billion. And I guess this year, minus 15 billion, right? Given how bad our revenue projections are. And so a lot of the work that I do is making sure that the things that are priorities for me, for my office, for the communities I represent, are represented in that budget. And then also legislatively doing things that are important for us. So for instance, we just a couple of months ago, last year, did the CLCPA, the most aggressive climate change goals in the entire country. The piece of legislation that I put in, which is a bill that I've been carrying for almost 15 years, creates an environmental justice advisory board to oversee the work around our climate goals, right? And so that's one of the ways that we get involved. We also have, from a leadership perspective, an ability to make appointments. And so I've been, working across a lot of different areas to make sure that African Americans, Latinos, Asians, women are included in the people who sit on the various boards, task force, and other, government agencies that we have that oversee, what we do. And so between the legislative kind of aspect and the other work, that's kind of the way that I've been, interacting with this particular subject matter.
Thank you, Senator. And next I will ask Sandra Granum to respond. Are you on mute? Well, while we're waiting for that, I'm going to ask Michael Garner to respond.
If you need me to keep talking, I'm happy to.
No, I'm gonna call. I had my Nike outfit on, but I wanted to be more business professional. I just changed up right quick. So hey, listen, hi everybody. I hope everybody, your families are doing well. Let me just say that that the MTA is still open for business. We are North America's largest transportation system with over 75,000 employees. We are a $1 trillion organization when you include all of our equipment, subways, buses, real estate, and what have you. We service 5,000 square miles. We have a $16 billion annual budget, and we have a $6 billion annual budget in which we buy goods and supplies and hire contractors. So we are out engaged in making sure that taxpayers' monies are not only spent in an inclusive manner, but in a cost-effective manner as well. And so I stated on our pre-call that just because there is an emergency declaration does not mean that MWBE firms should not apply. And so during the COVID-19 crisis, since March of 2020, we bought $230 million of COVID supplies and services. So every night, you know, that we shut down the subway system and we disinfect all of our subway cars and subway stations. And so out of that $230 million that we spent since March, exactly 73 million or 32% of that went to New York State certified MWBE firms. And so you hear sometimes that agencies say that because it's an emergency, we could not take time out to find minority women-owned businesses. Our agency staffs understand, the procurement staff understand that they are held accountable of making sure, as once again, that we spend taxpayers' monies in a cost-effective manner, but in an inclusive manner. And so we issued that press release, and we basically had a op-ed piece as to during a crisis how you must make sure that Black, Hispanic, and Asian businesses are included in your process. Since Senator Parker, the Black business community had been adversely affected by COVID-19. So we must find a way in order to include them in our buying and procurement processes, and the MTA has been doing that. From a data point perspective, out of 97 state agencies and authorities, we are ranked #1 in the state with respect to dollars paid to minority women-owned firms. Last year, that number totaled $936 million. In a very, very short period of time, we are going to eclipse the $1 billion mark. And out of that $936 million that we paid to New York State certified minority women-owned firms, 38% of that went to Black and Hispanic-owned businesses. And so we focus on solutions, and we are not blinded by the problems.
Thank you. And I will ask Sandra Granum now to introduce herself and talk about her role in equity, promoting equity. Do we have you? Hi, I think you're on mute. Huh. So I think we're having problem with Sandra Granum's sound, and I'm hoping our support at City and State can assist with that, because we want to make sure that we're including her in the conversation. I'm going to go straight to Lindsay Greene and ask if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. This is Lindsay Greene. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Pleased to be joining you all today. My role touches a lot of things at the agency. We're sort of the corporate strategy department that sits within my group of teams, as well as most of our programmatic initiatives. And we partner a lot with the more real estate facing parts of the organization. And I'd say the most interesting thing that that we, I think, have experienced and really started to take notice at the beginning of COVID was we really honed in on the fact that just everything about the pandemic laid bare a lot of systemic inequities that, you know, many of us knew about, but it took away the opportunity for, you know, curtains or what, if you will, to sort of obfuscate and hide some of those things. And you started to see that in how the economic factors played out in terms of which businesses were closed, who owned those businesses, who worked for those businesses. Even, you know, you look at the demographics of who were the essential sectors and who were the essential workers and the wages that they make and more accurately don't make. And so that's really been top of mind for us throughout the pandemic response, both in terms of trying to think about what does recovery look like and how do you do that, trying to really prioritize equity and sort of amp up things that we have been doing before, like our different MWBE programming, but how do you make that bigger and better and you know, start to try to tighten up some of the things that had always been opportunities for improvement, but now feel so much more important. So that's a lot of where we're trying to focus our time, and we can get into some of the specifics going forward, but just trying to think about addressing some of these gaps and trying to use our work and pivot it towards better serving the communities that were the worst off is really where our focus is right now.
Thank you for that. So we'll start on the first questions, and as soon as we have Sandra Granham's audio, I would love for her to jump into the conversation. So our state will celebrate Juneteenth as an official holiday going forward. This is thanks to a bill that Senator Parker sponsored. So Senator Parker, this was a bold move that taps into the momentum of the racial justice protests. And what kind of bold ideas are you seeing happening in this legislature, the state legislature, that will help us to further economic equity?
Yeah. Well, thank you for acknowledging this. And certainly let me acknowledge the Assembly sponsor, Assemblywoman Alicia Hyman from Queens, who really was the big champion on getting this bill across the finish line. But this has been an idea that's been a long time coming. Actually, the first bill on this issue was introduced by former Senator and former Majority Leader John Sampson, really over a decade ago. So this has been a conversation that we've been in. And Sheryl, let me just say, I don't really think that this is really that much of a bold move. In fact, I have been looking around and all the things that people are doing. You know, the murals on the street are cute. You know, getting rid of Aunt Jemima is cute, right? And taking down some statues are cute. But people are more concerned with right now the symbols of white supremacy as opposed to deconstructing the systems of white supremacy. And really what I think that what would really be bold is really to us to do a better job at deconstructing those systems of white supremacy. And so a lot of the conversations I'm now having, particularly as the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, is when we look at these organizations, who's on your board, right? You know, how many Blacks, Latinos, Asian women are on your board? What's your strategy if you're a statewide company to have your board be representative of the diversity that you see in your state? Or if you're a national company, what are you doing to see that those numbers look like the nation? All right? What are you doing in terms of your senior leadership in your organizations? Are you promoting people? And then let's talk about some of the more important things we need to do in terms of not just procurement. And procurement is good. And I really want to acknowledge my president of 100 Black Men and my brother, Michael Garner, for the work that he's doing, because he really carries the state in a lot of ways in terms of our MWBE numbers. If you just listen to the MTA numbers, you think that we're on a good course, but the MTA is significantly outperforming the other state agencies. So we need to do better, both internally on the state level, but we also need to be demanding more in terms of procurement. Lastly, let me just also say is that we have to go beyond procurement, and we have to start looking at some equity relationships. And what are the equity partnerships that corporations are engaged in, and how are they engaged in those equity relationships? In this moment, as we're still going through COVID, and we start looking at the unemployment, right? So again, the unemployment numbers are abysmal, right? and they're abysmal for white people. So you know how bad they are in the Black and Latino community, right? But if we think that white employment is going to be the way that we get ourselves out of this economic hole, we're sorely mistaken. And we really need to do two things. We need to really start encouraging new entrepreneurship by people in our communities. Some of that is going to be eventually anchored by state and city and federal contracts. And the other part we have to do is help our current entrepreneurs retool and reconnect, right? We have to start thinking about money as energy and understanding that energy doesn't dissipate. It just recreates in another space and time. And so we have to figure out where's money being made in COVID. And again, Michael Garner talked a little bit about that in the context of the MTA, right? But we need to start thinking about that in a more broader fashion. And so if you're running a restaurant and you were indoor service, you now have to start thinking about how do I do more outdoor service as possible and more takeout, right? If you want to stay in that business, right? I've seen stories about people who were baking stuff, and then they started making more money selling the flour and the other things for baking than they were actually selling baked goods, right? That may be the way that, because now people are home, so people are doing more baking. And so we need to start looking at those new opportunities in the context of this emerging economy, right? The COVID economy, and start getting people prepared for those opportunities.
Could you talk a little bit more, Senator, about that emerging COVID economy, where you see areas of opportunity that your constituents could take advantage of, and also what are the barriers that you see that need to be moved in order for that to take off?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the whole question is about where are opportunities, right? So again, Michael Garner talked about cleaning, for instance. Everybody needs to now do sanitize their offices, their workspaces, so on and so forth. So if you have a cleaning company, you need to invest in things that do some deep cleaning and sanitizing, right? That's one area that's an opportunity. Again, in the food area, people still need food. There's still, new opportunities in terms of virtual entertainment that we could be plugging into for folks, right? I'm the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. The clean energy economy still has to go forward. We still have energy goals to meet in the state of New York, right? And so the clean energy economy, being engaged in solar, being engaged in wind, being engaged in, biodigesters and all those type of things are going to be opportunities for people.
Let me ask you, hold on for a second. I'm going to ask if city and state can go on mute, please. Thank you.
See, they trying to, when I start dropping the truth, they start, no, I'm joking. So, there's, I think, a number of opportunities, particularly in the green collar economy, right? I'm a big fan of Van Jones. You should check out his book, The Green Collar Economy. I think even within the context of COVID, the things that he writes out in that book are true, that when we start looking, and particularly in Black and Latino communities, and doing things like, being a carpenter, but not just being a carpenter in the usual way, but like retrofitting homes, because efficiency is going to be 10% of our goal, right? So how do you make all these old homes and businesses in the state of New York more energy efficient, right? And you need carpenters and electricians to do that work. And so people who have those skills, or people who can't get those skills, are gonna need that. The tech, and lastly, let me just say, the tech community, right? And so, they need people who know how to code. This is gonna be an area in which this is going to continue to take off, particularly as things become more and more virtual, and we figure out how to do more things virtually. As you just indicated, right? Like with even just with Zoom calls and WebEx and all this other stuff. We just need people who just understand the underpinnings of this technology and know how to do the security around them, and know how to do the platform maintenance and so on and so forth, right? And so that becomes another opportunity. The things that were somewhat of a roadblock still continue to be a roadblock, right? One, in our communities, we have people who know how to cook food, don't know how to run a restaurant. People could build a table, don't know how to sell furniture, right? And so that continues to be the same problem, is getting people the technical assistance that they need to know how to either retool or to tool up in their areas, or to find people who are complementary pieces to what they do. So if you come in and you're the entrepreneurial head, you may need to bring somebody in who is a subject specialist. If you are the subject specialist, if you're a carpenter and you want to sell furniture, you may not be able to make that thing. So you may have to bring in somebody who is a great director of sales to help you run that part of your business while you concentrate on creating a quality product, right? You know, I always give the example of Apple, right? And everybody knows Steve Jobs, but Steve Jobs was just the carnival barker. The guy who actually built the computer is Steve Wozniak, who most people don't know his name, right? And so, you know, but it's that duality in the business model that allowed Apple to become, you know, a success. And so people need to look at that. And then lastly, access to capital, right? And Mike, including in that is access to bonding, right? And so people need access to capital. And the big problem there is the city and the state had a bigger role in that pre-COVID. And now with the state being in $15 billion worth of deficit for this year and probably over $30 billion over the next 2 years, that's a more of a Herculean task for us. And the city being in over $5 billion worth of deficit this year is a problem for them as well. And so, you know, the P3 funding was really helpful. More funding for entrepreneurs, that's going to be important. But also the way that we plug into the financial institutions in our communities and get them to be engaged is going to be important. And I think that we're really going to have to hold a lot of the white financial institutions put their feet to the fire to make sure that they're giving back to their communities. Most of them are probably not reaching their goals as it relates to their Community Reinvestment Act responsibilities. And we're probably going to need to really pay attention to those things and make sure that they're investing where they need to so that this access to capital can allow Black businesses to grow. And not, last point, not because I'm necessarily concerned about petty bourgeois capitalism as much as I understand that Black people hire Black people, Latino people hire Latino people, and that's how you're going to create full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits for our community.
Thank you, Senator. And I want to come back to a few points in a moment, access to capital and also capacity building, because I think it's a very important part of this discussion. You know, if we are talking about inclusion in these opportunities, can Black and minority-owned businesses actually be ready to take advantage of those opportunities? But for right now, what I would love to do is to have Sandra Granum come on and talk a bit about her role at the AG's office and also how it relates to equity.
Good afternoon. You can hear me. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you to my husband, Colvin Granum, for making this happen, because I am a very techno-challenged and with the weather and conditions, so apologies to all. So first of all, I want to thank City and State for having me, and thank you all for your patience. I have been given the honor and privilege to serve as the New York State Office of the Attorney General's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, and that happens because of our leadership. Attorney General Letitia James came into the office and recognized that there was a void, and she created the office and again did me the honor of putting me in this position. So for those of you who are not familiar with the New York State Office of the Attorney General, I want to just briefly share with you what we do. We represent the people and the offices and agencies of New York State and defend them in court. And we also affirmatively act on behalf of the people of the state of New York, representing their rights and interests and fighting to protect them. If you know anything about Letitia James, you know that she is a real fighter for the cause of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she did so as New York City's public advocate, and she's leading the way as New York State's Attorney General, doing us all proud and serving us and doing all that she can to lead the fight to protect the rights of all of our citizens. So in my role as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, my mission in that position is to provide leadership, guidance, and support to the executives in my office and to all of the staff with respect to all things involving diversity, inclusion, and equity. Attorney General James wants diversity, equity, and inclusion to be a part of the DNA of our office. so that we are better able to serve the state because we have a diverse perspective, that we are inclusive of all those in our office, because it's not just the attorneys. And I'm an attorney, and I started in the office as a practicing attorney. But I know that it takes much more than just the attorneys to make the work that we do happen and to create the successes that we experience every day. If you look in the press, you see how the office is fighting for the people of the state of New York. And because we are so diverse in this state, what we do impacts on people around the country. Therefore, in most of our major litigations, attorney general's offices across the country join in us in fighting for all those actions that are contrary to civil rights, such as immigrants' rights, DACA, fighting for tenants' rights, housing issues, employment, fighting regulations that are going against creating clean air and water for us. So everything that we do really has an impact. And she wants this office to be as diverse as the people that we represent. And we're working hard to do that with our hiring and recruitment efforts. We're doing that internally in terms of creating a sense of belonging in the office and inclusion, recognizing the contributions of all the people, and recognizing that the diverse perspectives help us to do a better job representing the state and the interests of the people of the state of New York. And so I work in recruitment, I work with hiring issues, I will be looking and working on procurement issues as well. We look at internal policies and procedures to see that, make sure that they reflect our inclusion and equity concerns within the functioning of the office. We also are working to share training and knowledge and information, because one of the key things in terms of being effective in representing the interests is to make sure that the people who are doing that representation understand the communities that they're representing. So we're working hard to provide that kind of training, sensitivity, understanding. Understanding implicit bias is something that is very important to the success of our work, because it informs how people conduct themselves in many ways. And so it helps us to understand ourselves, because we all have bias. So it helps us to understand ourselves, our views, and to put ourselves in the shoes of the communities that we're representing, and to be the communities that we are representing. We do that internally. In my office, we're doing a number of things. We're in the process of forming a diversity committee, which will have representation across the office. We're a very large office. We are in 13 offices around the state, about 1,900 employees, 700. Certainly.
Yes, so, oh, I'm hearing a little bit.
Yes, I've got a little bit of
All right.
feedback. Go right ahead, go right ahead.
Yeah, so how does, say, obviously your efforts are going to be successful, you diversify, it's a much more inclusive agency. So how does that translate into more equity in the streets and more justice for Black and brown communities? Can you break that down?
I think, in my view, I think it translates in a better understanding of those communities. Say, for example, one of the examples that I like to use is that if you don't have some cultural competency, you may misread and misinterpret actions that you observe on the street. For example, a police officer is interviewing a woman who may be wearing hijab. She does not look him directly in the eye or look her directly in the eye. And sometimes people take that as a sign of being disingenuous, not telling the truth. And so what we need to understand is, in that culture, it may be impolite or improper for a woman to look a man directly in the eye. And it has nothing to do with her trying to hide something. So I think that providing better training with respect to bias, with respect to cultural differences, will help us to be better in that respect. Whether it's, we don't police the streets, but we are involved in helping to investigate the police who are policing our streets. And so maybe we ascertain that there needs to be a greater level of study and training and sensitivity to the communities that they're actually policing. And I think that impacts on civil cases as well, because we are concerned about health issues, we're concerned about housing issues, consumer issues, and for us to better understand our communities and to have those people who are litigating on behalf of those communities, I think we'll all be better served.
Thank you. Thank you. So now what I'd like to do is to jump in a little bit and talk about outreach strategies. Michael Garner, I'm going to ask you first, what kind of outreach strategies are you employing to make sure that those vendors that may be able to provide the MTA goods and services know that they can and get into the pipeline?
So we have a new concept that we created called a new firm orientation. And what that does essentially is most agencies, they will certify you, but they leave you in the abyss to fend for yourself. So what we do is that we bring in all of our newly certified firms and we integrate them into the 6 different MTA operating agencies. The MTA is 6 different operating agencies in one. And so we bring all these firms in, and all of the agencies have the opportunity to talk about what type of opportunities that they have and what it would take for these firms to register. So when there are RFPs that go out, basically they will be forwarded one. And so that's a beginning of the firm's experience at the MTA. So they follow up and they meet with the people who will make the key decisions, because agencies and organizations do business with people who they know and who they trust. And so if the opportunity comes, the MTA is not going to stop our system because one contractor does not have the ability to supply goods and services. And so our focus is making sure that the certified firm is primed for the opportunity. We're there to support. And when the opportunity comes along, they are there and they can execute it. So for example, I'll give you a horror story. I got an email from a MWBE firm who in fact indicated that they had the ability to supply COVID-19 mask, and that they had the mask here in the US and it was stocked. And so I forwarded the information over to our procurement people. They had a conversation. They issued the firm an $8.9 million contract to supply masks. 30 days passed. We didn't hear from the firm. So the story switched from that they had these masks stocked to that they now have to go to Vietnam to get the mask. So make a long story short, after 15 additional days, the MTA rescinded the PO and gave the PO to someone else. So the story there is that when you are afforded the opportunity, you must come through. You must be aligned, and you must have the ability to execute the scope of services for that contract. If not, we are then going to move on. As I started and indicating that we buy $6 billion a year in goods and services, everything from construction to information technology, to legal services, to investment banking services, to asset fund management services, vendors and suppliers. And so like my senator, my good friend, Senator Parker, the Senate and the Assembly and the governor's office hold us accountable for only one thing. That thing is that objective is, how many dollars did you spend on an annual basis to minority women-owned firms? That's the only thing that we are held accountable for. not good faith efforts, not best faith efforts, but at the end of the day, how many dollars did we spend with certified minority women-owned businesses? Because when you talk about social equity, when you talk about all of the problems that the Black community, that the Hispanic community are going through, and mind you, the Bronx is the third poorest county in the country. How is that possible? That we're sitting here right now in Manhattan, which is the Fortune 500 capital of the world, but yet the Bronx is the third poorest county in the country, you know? And so we understand that out of all the issues that Black, Hispanics, and other ethnic groups have in this city, if they had one thing, it would solve all of those problems, and that's a job or a contract opportunity. So your lack of housing goes away, your access to healthcare goes away, your access to educational opportunities go away if you only had that one opportunity of a job or a contract.
Thank you. Thank you. And I would like Lindsay Greene to jump in here and talk a bit about not only outreach, but also then what you're doing at the EDC, or what your challenges are in making sure that once you've reached out to minority women-owned businesses, that they're ready to take on these opportunities.
Sure. So this was something we were trying to be mindful of and struggled with at the beginning of our pandemic response. For instance, you know, we activated our local manufacturing context to help make PPE for a lot of the hospital workers. And, you know, I think one of the hardest things we realized at the beginning of that was that often in an initial setup, and given the universe we have now, speed is often at odds with our MWBE and equity goals. We don't have enough of the MWBE firms of the size and scope to be able to respond and be reliable and get to that level of immediate execution. You know, we've been trying to do a lot of that capacity building work on the construction side for some time. You know, we have everything from some of the like dedicated like programming attached dedicated RFPs that Sandra and Michael talked about. And so we've been doing that, and we still have a long road to go on that. But one of the things that we tried to do when we first started was, okay, we sprang up an initial set of procurement, and then once we had a sort of consistent and somewhat reliable chain, we then started folding in a lot of the MBE and MWBE firms that we knew were out there and maybe couldn't produce as much as quickly, but we tried to partner them with other people so that it didn't necessarily create an extra burden on the overall system per se from an operational perspective, but they were participating in the procurement. They got to bring their workers back and add to our overall totals. You know, that obviously is I think, you know, sort of slower and a little bit of a patchwork solution, but we tried to build towards that, which was great. But it gave us some lessons in really trying to think about growing the MWBE universe in areas that are not necessarily procurement opportunities. To pick up on Senator Parker's point, not everything is about government spend. You know, there are MBE firms that exist out there that can respond to private contracts, and you want to have large MBE firms, and I mean large, just like several hundred, just somebody that has the back office systems and the computers to be able to look at a problem and say, okay, I can break this down, I can do it. And you have to get them to the point where they have access to a little bit of working capital that they can respond quickly and buy a bunch of materials and do things like that. So,
so let me
I think trying to be.
So so really what you're talking about, I think I've heard it referred to as bundling. Is that the right for it? Or is it in terms of what you're talking about having, because the minority women-owned businesses tend to be small and may not have the capacity or critical mass to quickly ramp up and take on an opportunity, you're partnering with them. So you're basically then having several of them work together as one unit. Am I right?
We did that, yes. There was a particular effort to do that from a geographic basis. We I think tried to cluster several businesses together in Harlem and the South Bronx. It wasn't as neat as we would have liked, but that helped with a lot of operational perspectives. I think, you know, that was just how we dealt with that, with trying to get to a participation level in that specific instance. We haven't necessarily really been pursuing bundling across the board as part of our broader MWBE strategy. It's one of the things we're looking at now. If it's effective, if it works in a sort of intentional go forward way, it's one of the things we're going to look at as we look at, you know, sort of what are some different ways we can get at that, at capacity building, and particularly in sectors that aren't necessarily procurement based, but, you know, if you're dealing with a larger sort of service contract, maybe with a larger corporation or something like that, or you sort of are in a more traditional goods business, I think it maybe is a little bit easier to have firms work together and that they don't have to be as competitive and there isn't as much friction. But it's something we want to explore as to where it's really value add as opposed to just something that we did, and sort of see if it can be successful on an intentional basis, not unlike the approaches that a lot of folks have taken as, okay, if you have $1 billion capital project, you know, don't just rely on the GC to break it out and do the right thing with the subs. Try to break the capital procurement down into sections so that you can get at a different scale of firm and help them stretch, and so that, you know, over time you get to that diversity of participation in your sort of A group responses.
Yeah, the term that you was referring to is called debundling. And that's
the second one is debundling, right?
Debundling,
yes.
Right. And you know, there's a couple of paths of how to include minority women-owned businesses. One is at the subcontractor level, and that level is the majority of companies that sell goods and services to prime contractors and prime consultants. The other one, and the new paradigm, is to debundle larger projects and actively go out and recruit minority and women-owned firms to bid on your projects as prime contractors or prime consultants. Because if you're ever going to grow and develop the MWBEs in the state and the city, it's going to be at the prime level and not the sub level. And so at the prime level, a firm they are in control of their own destiny then. Basically, they have the opportunity to hire subcontractors and employ people and execute their contracts at the prime level with respect to a direct contract with the agency.
Thank you. Senator.
Yeah,
Parker,
that's.
No, please, Lindsay, please say your piece, and then I'm hoping that the senator can jump in on this.
Sure. I was just going to echo what Michael was saying about when we talk about capacity building, I think really where everybody is focused is how do you get to those folks that are primes and are prime ready, and that's where you can build. That's where there's the most work to be done, but that's where the greatest like wealth creation opportunity is, you know, because those firms are in a position of power. They can sort of influence what else happens in the rest of the field. They have more influence over who they hire and how they hire. They have more resources to invest in training and things like that of their workers. So that's really sort of the gold star where we want to get to in terms of trying to deliver opportunities for people and where you want to, where you're developing from a capacity building perspective, particularly in the construction and technical fields, especially. Sorry. Go ahead, Senator.
Well, I just think that, you know, in this moment, again, I'm worried about people who need jobs, right? And again, for me, the pathway to create jobs in Black and Latino communities are going to be primarily, you know, entrepreneurial, right? The city is in $5.5 billion deficit. The mayor is threatening on firing 22,000 people, right? And we're hoping to avert that disaster, right, of city workers, 22,000 city workers just not having jobs. And so the question is, how do we get people to jobs very, very quickly? And that's really where the conversation needs to be had. And so some of that may be, right, a kind of mix of companies that already have contracts that we can expand, Lindsay and Michael, right? And how do we get people ramped up, right, to get bigger contracts? You know, part of the problem, like on the state level, a lot of people don't want to be in the MWBE program because I don't know if we have one minority company that's a prime on any contract in the whole damn state, which is ridiculous, right? On like anything significant. And so a lot of people are afraid of that, but we really need some big contracts and some prime contracts to go to some Blacks and Latinos so they can hire some people in this moment, right? And beyond that, we have to look at kind of where the opportunities are in the private sector and start preparing people and start maybe training people up to be in those places. We have CUNY, we have SUNY, we have BOCES, and so we have the mechanisms and the infrastructure to train people, but I think that we need some signals from the private sector about where the jobs are going to be created at. I mean, everybody I'm talking to lately is like, oh, we're losing all these jobs. These are the sectors that are not going to have jobs. And I'm like, okay, where are jobs being created? That's the conversation I need to know. I need somebody to tell a brother where we're going to get jobs from, right? Now, in the intersection between police reform and job creation, I've been having a lot of conversations with Eric Adams, our borough president here in Brooklyn, and he's talked a lot about the fact that, one of the things we need to do is deal with the issue of putting more of our own people in our own communities into the police force. So for instance, like right now, we essentially sign up to have an occupying force come into the city and police us, right? A bunch of white cops from Jersey and Long Island and upstate to come police us. We really should be giving those full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits to people who live in the city. So I actually have a bill that will require a residency requirement for the NYPD, right? And it's prospective. It's not retroactive. It's prospective, right? So if you currently are a cop, you live out of the city, it wouldn't affect you. In the new classes, it would affect you. If you were somebody who applied for a job and you lived in, let's say, Long Island, applied for a job, went through the academy, was offered a position in NYPD, you would have a year to find a place in New York City, right? And so like, it is those kind of that's bold, Sheryl, in terms of things that we could do that would help employment. We need to expand the green collar jobs program, right? We have something I helped pass 10 years ago, which is that we took money out of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative program, and we about $113 million, and retrofitted 1 million houses over 5 years, right? And again, those goes back to those vocational jobs of people who are, carpenters and electricians and people who can do energy audits. And we need to do that kind of work to both deal with our crumbling infrastructure and then simultaneously build the clean energy economy here in the state of New York, right? And so those are some of the areas in which we need to pay attention to. We have to think through daycare. And what are we doing about daycare? We have women who can't go back to work, right? And single mothers are the largest source of poverty in our country and in our city and state, right? Not them themselves. That kind of sounded crazy after I said it. But I mean, in terms of we look at, where poverty comes from and how we can eradicate poverty, the best group of people that we should be focusing on are single mothers. Meanwhile, although we do have, I think, a fairly good strategy to take people back to work here in the state of New York, we have not talked about what do we do with the daycare center, the daycare sector, and how we deal with that. I'm putting in a bill that we're working on in my office right now that would actually pay mothers to take care of their own children, right? Right now, like, why are we giving people subsidies to send their kids away? Let's pay mothers to stay home with their own children, which helps you deal with the whole issue of social distancing and the pandemic, and simultaneously puts income in their, similar to the CDPAP program that we do now around home health aides, right? Where you can get, somebody in your family or family or friend or something to be a home health aide. Same kind of concept, and pay people that way. So we need those kind of ideas to go forward as we start also looking at how do we help people make their businesses more virtual, right? And then how do we train people up in things like tech, where there's, again, lots of jobs, right? And then again, in New York, the fire industry is always important, right? I don't mean firemen, Sheryl. I mean finance, insurance, and real estate, right? Those areas are not going anywhere. Commercial real estate is not quite doing as well as it's been doing, but it's not going to disappear, right? And so there's still going to be opportunities in finance, insurance, and real estate in order to help people, make money and to feed their families.
I sense, Senator, that a lot of people will, who are in, contributing to the chat messages right now, will want to follow up with you and with our other panelists about how they can connect with those opportunities. So we have a little more time to answer questions, but after that, I'm hoping that each one of you can at least address to the audience a little bit the most effective way for them to connect with your respective offices. I do have a question from the audience. How are we addressing employment for older New Yorkers who are not ready to retire and need additional support to work effectively as we move toward working digitally? Would the senator like to?
The answer is that we're really not. And it's probably, you know, I mean, look, we can't even get, there's people who applied for unemployment. I mean, there are people who applied for unemployment in March who still haven't gotten their, you know, their first check yet, who hasn't even been certified in the system yet. We are way, way, way behind. That is a good question. It is something that we need to give some thought to. You know, and again, it's people like that who are going to be the hardest to, frankly, to employ, right? Because their salary requirements are higher because they've been working for a while and their experience levels are very high. And when those management positions and those more senior positions disappear, a lot of times those are the ones that are not getting replaced. And so we need to give some thought to that. And I honestly just don't have a good answer for you, but I promise I will start working on it.
Okay. Well, as a follow-up, this is for Sandra. I'm going to get back to talking about your outreach efforts a bit because, you know, obviously it is recruitment and people are looking for jobs right now. So what are you doing specifically in terms of your outreach efforts, and what's the best way for people to get your attention?
Okay, well, unfortunately, right now, the office is really on pause in terms of hiring, obviously because of the COVID-19. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so there are very few opportunities available now, but we do post all of our jobs on our website under employment opportunities. So those are opportunities that are exempt, that are not through the state exam process. And then there are also the civil service exam positions. So all of that information is obtainable through our website, which is ag.ny.gov. When we are hiring, and when it is actively done, then that's done by our Legal Recruitment Bureau. I work in conjunction with them, and I used to be the head of recruitment. And one of the things that we do is we do career fairs. We obviously posting our jobs with minority bar associations because that was our particular focus. But we're really advertising everywhere that we can within our budgetary constraints, being state agency. And I've done conversations and recruitments at schools. We did a virtual one with Howard University Law School to encourage students of color to apply. We recruit at CUNY Law School, again, to encourage students of color to apply for our attorney positions and for our internships. I speak on panels around the city and doing recruitment efforts. And I think that those are our core strategies for reaching out and to be available. And we encourage people within our office to help us with recruiting because, again, that will help us with diversity. And I have an open door. I consult with people on their careers, and I'm in connection with the law schools, with people at the bar associations. So our outreach is constant and ongoing.
Thank you. So there's another question from the audience. Meeting insurance requirements on public projects is a significant hurdle for a lot of small businesses. And many times it prevents these small businesses from being able to perform on public projects. I wanted to know if you know of any organizations that maybe be able to assist MWBE firms with these insurance requirements. I'm going to direct this to Michael Garner.
Yeah, sure. You know, there's a concept that we use at the MTA and at the School Construction Authority, and those are the only agencies that have this concept, and it's called OSIP. OSIP stands for Owners Controlled Insurance Program, which allows the MTA and the School Construction Authority to wrap up all of their contractors, including the prime contractor and all of the subcontractors, therefore reducing the insurance for MWBEs who are working on SCA and MTA projects. The battle is this. If my state senator or assembly person sponsors a bill to get all agencies, city agencies and state agencies to adopt the OSIP program, the insurance lobby will fight it tooth and nail because they feel as though that a OSIP program takes away business from their insurance agents and other members. But the key is that we must find a way to afford cost-effective insurance to all of our MWBE contractors who want to work on government projects. And the OSIP concept is the way. Owners Controlled Insurance Program.
Owners Controlled Insurance Program.
Or OSIP.
OSIP.
Mike, let's talk after this.
Okay, great.
All right.
Great, sounds good.
Lindsay, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about this as well.
Yeah, the OSIP is really the gold standard in terms of alleviating that flexibility. So we're trying to explore ways that we could try to deploy that. We partner with a lot of other agencies, and so I think it sort of is a matter of getting access to that authority for those sort of capital contracting entities. But I think there also is some adjustments that we're trying to look at. Is it really that every single contract and procurement you put out there has to have the same requirements in every instance? Obviously, safety is premium, and particularly in times like these, but I think there's a balance between, getting the requirements that you need as a bare minimum, and where those requirements may be just a shade too strict for the actual project that you're trying to do. So there's some calibration that we're looking into to see if we have some room to do that. In addition to trying to see if we can explore OSIP as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And let's see, we have some more questions. Well, one of them before is, it refers to some ground we've covered a little bit, but it's the selection process for the DOT makes it very difficult for Black firms to be selected to perform prime work. Is the state legislator and the governor's office reviewing the process to make opportunities as a prime for DOT projects easier?
Yes, we are. I mean, this has been an ongoing conversation, with all of us. We have a legislative task force headed by Senator James Sanders and Assemblywoman Rodneyse Bichotte. I'm a member of that MWBE task force, and this has been kind of an ongoing conversation. So, as part of the issue that I raised before, why there's some large companies that don't want to be part of the MWBE program because they feel like it hampers their ability to become a prime contractor, and they want to be able to bid for those large contracts. So we really need to, we haven't cracked the code yet, and it's been one of the things that we are in conversation and trying to figure out how do we, how do we get over that hurdle?
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. All right, we have another question. Let me see who to direct this to. The inequities in school funding between the wealthy, middle class, and poor school districts are staggeringly unfair and bad economic policy when it comes to investing in New York's future. How about forcing Governor Cuomo and the New York State Legislature to finally honor the 1993 and 2001 state Supreme Court rulings on the campaign for fiscal equity to provide all students with a sound basic education? and fully fund schools in poor urban school districts such as New York City and Buffalo?
Yeah, not really an employment and diversity question, but let me just give a quick answer on this. I've been one of the leaders before Robert Jackson, who actually started the CFE lawsuit 30 years ago. Before he got to the legislature, I was really literally the person who's been leading the fight on this for almost 20 years. And it's certainly something that we should be doing. The governor actually argues that the way he's funded education over the last 7 years, he's actually fulfilled it. I don't necessarily agree. I think a number of my colleagues don't agree. And so it becomes a significant conversation. And a lot of it is frankly held up. And I think the governor has done a fantastic job on a lot of things, particularly as related to guiding us through the pandemic. I give him very high marks on the work that he's done around MWBEs and the work that we're talking about here today. And I think that on school funding generally, as he has funded schools since he's been in office, has been correct. They owe us money. There's a difference between it being properly funded now and the owing of money. Schools over the last 10 years in the state of New York have been properly funded. We actually spend more money per pupil than any other school system in the history of the United States. So in the moment we're properly funded schools. Could it properly be funded better? Yes. Does the state owe the city and other high need school districts money? Yes. And that becomes an ongoing negotiation, in part held up because of the unequal power that the legislature has with the governor as it relates to the budget. Many of us are having conversations now about a constitutional amendment that would change that. I certainly support that amendment and think that we ought to equalize the power between the governor and the legislature as it relates to budgets. But as it relates to how we funded school systems, yes. Now, the problem where it needs to be changed is with my good friend, the mayor. And I think that the problem is when the way that the city of New York actually gives a funding that's not an equity funding or equity formula, it's an equality formula. So every school gets around, approximately the same amount of money. So if you're in the Upper East Side, right, in the richest community in the city of New York, or if you were in, East Flatbush in my district, those school districts are getting approximately the same amount of money. But the reality is the needs in East Flatbush are dramatically higher than the Upper East Side, and you need to have a formula that recognizes that equity that's needed, not equality.
Got it. Thank you for making that distinction. Well, we're going to wrap up shortly, and so what I would love to do is go around to those panelists who already haven't had a chance to talk about the best way that people in the audience can connect with them on opportunities and connect in an effective way, and things that they need to be prepared to do in order to connect with your agency. I'm going to ask Lindsay Greene first.
Sure. So most of our work is obviously done through program partners and folks that win our RFPs, either on the construction side or on the programmatic side. And much of those have obviously been paused right now because of COVID. But at least on I'll sort of tackle the real estate angle first. As things get remobilized and construction resumes, most of our hiring we do in partnership with the Workforce One system, which connects people through that are our contractors through a program called Hire NYC. That's where folks should first go. But I think Workforce One is the right portal to get there, and that is sort of the best direct connection to places where there's construction happening. And on the programmatic side, that is one where it depends on the program. A lot of those efforts are honestly benefiting entrepreneurs. So I think the best place for folks to keep an eye out for that is our own website and our own social media channels at EDC, where you will find out about our programs, who's been selected to run them in partnership with us, and when new cohorts are starting. A lot of what we do is partner with organizations that do workforce training in addition to sort of the classic incubator type model, but really trying to put folks to work in high earning potential fields. So the best place to gain access to those opportunities is first starting with our website as things like that sort of resume. Some of that is starting to happen virtually again, but again, our website is the best place to keep an eye out for those opportunities.
Thank you. Now we'll ask Michael Garner to answer that question as well.
Yes, so I'm sitting here in my office in the midst of a hurricane because we are serious about the engagement of MWBE firms, and anyone during this conference can reach out directly to me via email, and my email address is mgarner, M-G-A-R-N-E-R, at mtahq.org. Once again, mgarner at mtahq.org. And once you send me an email, I will delegate it to one of my effective and efficient staff, and we will definitely get back in contact with you. I will leave this in parting that the MTA is open for business. Prior to COVID-19, we had our largest capital budget in the history of the MTA, which was $55 billion that we were going to spend over 5 years. Due to COVID-19, we are reassessing our capital plan to see what projects we are going to go forward with, to see what projects that we're going to put on hold. In addition to that, we have the MTA's Small Business Mentoring Program, where we pre-qualify MWBE contractors. We pay them in 10 days. We waive their bonding. We have free training for them to become better contractors, and we change state law in order to, in fact, do that. Too many times we listen to the MWBE community, and the response is, well, like what you want sounds good, but it's in violation of the state law. So what should the next response be? Well, change the law. And so we working with our state senator Parker and others in the assembly, we changed the state law, and we now have the MTA Small Business Mentoring Program. Last year, we awarded $86 million in prime contracts to MWBE firms. The contracts that we award in that program is for $100,000 to $3 million. And for MWBE subcontractors who are used to working only as subcontractors, it's a game changer for them now to have the opportunity to work for the nation, for North America's largest transportation network as a prime contractor. And like I said, we waive bonding because we understand that if you're bondless, under ordinary circumstances, you could not work for any city or state agency. And so we have created our own internal bond where we are our own captive. So if you're bondless, we will wrap you up. We also hire Carver Federal Savings Bank, and they are our bank in order to issue loans up to $900,000 per contract, because we know that access to capital is still a barrier to entry for most MWBE firms. Final, we went back to Albany and we increased our discretionary threshold. So the MTA is the only agency in the state that has a $1 million discretionary threshold. And what that does, it gives us the ability to go out into the marketplace, solicit 2 or 3 prices from MWBE firms. As long as that pricing is aligned with historical pricing, we can make the award without right there on the spot, without going out for a more broader bidding.
Thank you.
So once again, the MTA is open for business.
Wonderful, wonderful. And thank you, just with 30 seconds, if the senator has a final word, we're coming to the close of our session.
Well, first of all,
Mission impossible.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks to the city and state for this opportunity to speak, and thank you for including me on this very illustrious panel of great speakers and people with great information. You can reach me directly at my office at 718-629-6401. Again, at 718-629-6401, or at parker@nysenate.gov. Again, that's parker@nysenate.gov. And I'm Senator Kevin Parker on Instagram, Senator Kevin Parker on Twitter, and on Facebook. And so you can reach me any of those places to connect with me in my office.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to thank the rest of our panelists for this afternoon. A number of people have asked if information is going to be provided afterward. My understanding is that there will be a follow-up email to all those who participated on Zoom. I'm Sheryl Huggins Salomon, and I want to thank City and State for hosting this panel, and I want to give things back to Gregg Bishop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheryl, and thank you, everyone. And again, we echo our thanks for the panelists. We are right at 3 p.m., and I'm excited to announce the next discussion. We want to just remind you that this event is sponsored by the New York City School Construction Authority, TD Bank, and Leverage Assessments. We're going to continue the conversation with our next panel, Striving for Parity in New York. In every category, cases, hospitalization, and deaths, COVID-19 hit African Americans and Latinos much harder than any other group in New York. COVID-19 also showcased the unequal impact. There we go. The unequal impact on public schooling, including lack of technology, access, and availability to lower income communities. What those in low income communities of color have claimed all along, that there is a tremendous racial disparity, is finally out in the open. Movements like the 15% pledge are calling on major corporations to commit to making 15% of the products they stock come from Black businesses. How can we make sure to conquer and support issues and movements like this? How can we make sure all procurement is equitable and fair? How can we make sure MWBEs and small business services and products are utilized and taken advantage of? Here is our moderator, Kiana Beckles, the CEO of Leverage Assessments, who will introduce today's panel, who will hopefully answer all these questions. Thanks for tuning in. Kiana.
Thanks, Greg, for your introduction. So we don't necessarily expect our panelists to have all the answers, but perhaps we'll have some responses and at least be able to have some conversation. So we're thankful to have these types of virtual platforms too, which can keep us safe during a pandemic. But we must also acknowledge that there are thousands of workers out there keeping our city moving. A disproportionate amount of those workers are from the Black and Hispanic community. I myself am a member of the Black American community in NYC. I'd like to take a moment to honor those workers, along with Congressman Lewis, and also remember the thousands of COVID victims who have died in our country. So let's just take a 30-second pause. Okay, so I was glad to see the Striving for Parity panel as a part of this conversation, because honoring these communities is not enough, especially because the term minority is a little misleading in New York City. The Black and Hispanic community represent about 51% of our population, while the national average for the Black and African American population is around 15%. Our numbers in New York City are closer to 25%. So this is a huge chunk of our city. And so we need to look deeper at how we can support African American MWBEs. We're gonna need these businesses in order for New York City to recover from this pandemic economically and from a health perspective. So I also know that our bios are and descriptions are in the program, so we won't take a ton of time with that, but if each of you could just start by stating your name, title, and also let me know how I should address you during the panel, we can get started that way. So we'll go in the order that we appear on the program. So my name is Kiana Beckles. Again, I'm the CEO of Leverage Assessments. Please call me Kiana. Next, we have Assemblywoman. Are you able to unmute?
Okay, sorry, I had some technical difficulties. Hi, my name is Assemblymember Rodneyse Bichotte. I represent the 42nd Assembly District, Flatbush, East Flatbush, Midwood. And I am also the Kings County, Brooklyn party leader. And I also chair the subcommittee of the Minority Women Business Enterprise Oversight Committee of the State of New York in the Assembly.
Thank you. Next, we have Jonnel Doris.
Hi, everyone. Jonnel, Doris, Commissioner of Small Business Services in the City of New York. And you can call me Jonnel. Thank you.
Awesome. Suzanne?
Hi, I'm Suzanne Vera, the Chief Diversity Officer for New York City School Construction Authority, and you can continue to call me Suzanne.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Next, we have Magali Austin.
Hi, I'm Magali Austin, but you can call me Maggie. I'm the Senior Advisor to the Mayor and the Director of the Mayor's Office of MWBE.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Maggie. If you all don't mind, let's just jump right into the questions. You're welcome to interrupt me if you forget that you had something that you want to respond to. Also, some responses will go out after our meeting. So if you had a response that if you have a response that you would like to add to the responses that you shared during this meeting, they will go out in a document afterward. So the first question I want to ask is about how many ethnic categories are eligible for the MWBE certification with the city? And what is the participation from the African American MWBE category?
I'll take that. So we have Hispanic American, we have Asian American, Native American, and Black American. Those are the minority-based categories that are eligible for MWBE certification. And Black Americans account for about 30% of the current MWBE pool. So there are about 3,000 out of the 10,000 certified MWBEs. 1,200 are women-owned, and about almost 1,800 are male-owned, are Black male-owned. And we certainly recognize as a city that Black American firms have historically received a lower share of prime contracts other than ethnic groups, right? As a matter of fact, when the mayor first asked me to serve as a senior advisor, that was one of the things that I discussed with him was the need to address the disparity within the disparity, because while the last quarter of fiscal year 20, we as a city achieved the 30% utilization rate. When you look at the numbers within that 30%, we're not quite there yet when it pertains to the Black and Hispanic owned firms. And so to correct this, we plan on leveraging the tools that we fought hard at the state level and those that our mayor has committed to through the recently signed executive order last week. So for example, through the executive order, we're directing agencies to use the MWBE non-competitive purchase method for procurements under $500,000. That is a huge tool, and it's discretionary. So that means that agencies can basically award that to any qualified certified MWBE. And for most businesses, $500,000 represents a huge opportunity. And it's a tool that we have at our disposal. So we're asking them to use specifically that tool. And this tool will also help the city address and combat the inequities. And it allows us to ensure that MWBEs, especially MWBEs of color, are an integral component of the city's economic recovery. Because if they're not, we as a city cannot recover unless we engage Black and Brown owned businesses.
Awesome, thank you. So next question, and I'm gonna ask this to a broader group, but how does the plan to reopen schools impact the MWBE community? Suzanne, I know that you have some stats to share with us.
As you understand, opening schools was a priority for the mayor as well as the governor. So we've been at the SCA working diligently on reopening schools. What have we been doing? Because of social distancing, we've been in a massive outreach and search for additional space because we have to expand classroom space. Part of the reopening plan, the first projects the SCA were authorized to restart once we had a complete shutdown were the projects that created capacity. So we restarted a number of capacity projects that will create additional seats in new schools in September. We have been also, our real estate department has been going across the city looking for additional space, because once schools are reopened, we have to ensure that there's significant social distancing, that we ensure that the classrooms are not overcrowded. So we've been on this massive surge. As a result of that, once we restarted the projects to do new capacity. Many MWBEs tend not to be new capacity, building new schools in that area. So what my team did was basically reach out and ensure that all of the schools that were restarted, the new schools, we ensure that MWBE participation was at the maximum. We have a 30% goal. We started to reach out to ensure that they not just met the 30% goal, but many of them exceeded the 30% goal. And I must say that overall, for the new schools, we are probably at 37% right now. In addition to that, because our president and CEO, Lorraine Grillo, realized that part of the impact of the minority community was that we needed to restart many of what we call our mentor projects. Our mentor projects are exclusively MW and local businesses doing projects within that area. So there was a huge push with City Hall as well as OMB to ensure that those projects restarted. As a result of that, we've restarted the majority of our mentor projects. We've worked on, as part of the reopening, we needed to do a significant amount of AC initiatives to ensure that the classrooms, we had sufficient AC and HVAC ventilation. So all of those projects for the AC, we've decided, the SCA decided will be done as part of the mentor program. So right now we are doing AC projects. We're doing many of the mentor projects that were at least 85% completed, have restarted. And then in addition to that, we have about another 400 projects we've asked OMB to allow us to restart and complete, which means we are now moving to restart all of our mentor projects, as well as doing the AC projects with MWBEs. We believe that will it will help us restart schools in all of our communities, but it will also significantly assist the most devastated communities as a result of COVID, which tend to be the Black and Latinx communities. So we have really centered on that as a result of assistance from our president, as well as City Hall, the Mayor's Office of MWBEs, and OMB.
Awesome. Would anyone else like to share?
Yes, Assemblymember Bichotte. First, and thank you, Suzanne. By the way, the SCA has been astronomical and has been the model in helping build a lot of MWBEs with capacity. They've been that model. So I think Suzanne, Lorraine Grillo, and the whole team will continue to be pushed, which is why I affirm what she's saying, because that's where most of our MWBEs are succeeding. It's through the SCA mentor program. But I want you to also think about the fact that people need to work, right? People need to work. People are at threat of being evicted. We're working on eviction moratoriums. We're trying to cancel rent and mortgage. I mean, we're doing all these things to keep the most vulnerable New Yorkers stable and at their home. And without childcare, because that's a big thing, a lot of these business owners, parents will not be afforded the opportunity to build their businesses, okay, in the MWBE community. Just 2 days ago, we saw a study that says 1/3 of New York's small business may be gone forever. When you think about schools reopening, you also have to think about, this is where a number of MWBEs can excel with contracts, facilitating workshops, doing extracurricular programming for the students, especially those who are stuck home with e-learning. And this was something that we worked very diligently with Gregg Bishop and Jonnel and the mayor's office in making sure that Department of Education would participate in the discretionary spend of $500,000. Okay, this is where Department of Education can literally handpick vendors, Black vendors, or women vendors, or minority vendors, to do work with the school. And you have MWBEs that are in the construction area, which sometimes is a big load because you need to build capacity, which is why you have the mentor program. So it takes a while to get to like at a success rate. But you have MWBEs who can do the professional services, who can facilitate workshops, who can, you know, again, do after school programming and things of that nature. And that's where we should look at an opportunity again, when we can use the technology model for our MWBEs to continue to participate in government contract with the Department of Education. It's very hard for MWBEs to now try to get these other big projects that will depend on construction and bonding and capital. I mean, the banks are not even giving us money, you know? So reopening the schools will certainly have a big impact on the MWBE community on many fronts. It allows the parents to go to work. It allows the SCA mentorship program to continue. And then it also allows minority women business enterprise to do contract professional services with the Department of Education.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your response. So the next question I have is, the House approves a colossal $1.3 trillion spending package the other day that includes $210 billion in emergency money to help federal agencies fight the coronavirus pandemic, in addition to funding other priorities. How much of that money comes to NYC MWBEs, and how much of that money comes to Black-owned businesses?
Hey, Kenya, thank you for having me, and to all my colleagues here, and our illustrious assembly member and leader who's sort of helped us navigate this process from the beginning, and our big champion in Albany. Thank you for all that you do. I just didn't want to continue without just really singing her praises. You know, I would say a lot of our work that we've done in the city so far has been attributed to a lot of legislation, which all has our name on it. And so thank you so much. And all my other colleagues on this, really good to be with you. And of course, the former commissioner, can't not shout out Gregg Bishop, a great partner, a great friend, and really thank you, sir, for all you did, sir, and doing now, sir. I appreciate you, sir. And this is a hot seat to sit in right now. So but Gregg showed us how to do it, and so we're following up with that. So Gregg, we'll keep the tradition going. Listen, guys, I want to say the structure that we have at the federal level, I think was in many ways, in all of the disaster recovery, was sort of flawed from the beginning. When you input money into a structure in the system that is not equal or doesn't really look to be equitable in any way, you're going to have a problem. And so I would say the challenge that many of our small businesses, in particular our Black-owned businesses, who 12% of them, by the way, who actually applied for PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program that we're talking about, stimulus, only 12% got what they actually asked for. And then on top of that, only 41% of them got anything at all. So the challenge for me is, you know, when we see these, and we want to thank our congressional leadership in the House, because they've been leading the way, but certainly we need the Senate to do its part. We need them to pass this actual stimulus so it gets to the businesses that matter. I will also say on the Paycheck Protection Program, we know that our Black businesses and Latino businesses, while even they were struggling the most and coming from neighborhoods and communities more that were impacted more than any other by the pandemic, again, being left out. But on top of that, they don't have an opportunity to engage in the financial structure and system that this program is being pushed through. What do I mean? When you think about CDFIs or community development financial institutions. That was an afterthought with the bills that were passed. We know that these community financial institutions, they actually helped small businesses in Black and brown communities to thrive. And they went the route with big business and big banks. And I think that was a challenge. So are we confident that a lot of this money will get to our community? We are concerned. And I think that's a real concern. I think we have to make sure that the parameters are in place. And again, the House leadership have done their part, but we have to make sure that the parameters are in place, the mechanism to use the smaller minority development financial institutions, the community development financial institutions who actually help our small businesses. And so you echo something that makes us all nervous. The city, as you know, we have a $9 billion deficit that we were trying to climb our way out of. So we know that federal aid is the way to go. We need the federal government to do what they need to do, but they have to structure it in a way that actually gets to the businesses that we're trying to help.
So, and that's a great response, and that segues into the next question, which was about the unused funds that are still left in the PPP budget, and how can we make sure that that money is not going to get spent up in big banks like the first wave, but is actually going to come down to small business owners and to minority-owned business owners and to Black-owned businesses.
Yeah, great point. And so, you know, what SBS does, and we do, I think, best, is that we are able to connect our small businesses, our minority businesses, to resources. And so one of the things we've been doing throughout this process is that we've been literally doing that with the PPP program. We've already connected thousands of small businesses to over $20 million of funding through LISC and NDC and other partners that we're literally helping them walk them through the process of doing that. On the $128 billion that's left, we're doing the same thing. We're not only really just doing it broadly, we're literally targeting the CDFIs, the banks, the community institutions that work with our small businesses in order to get them to let everybody know, by the way, August 8th is the deadline as of now. It may change, who knows, but it's August 8th is the deadline. And so that's a few days away. And so we've been emailing, we've been in conversation, we have webinars, et cetera, throughout this time, but also specifically this week, really pushing and pushing. We have 200,000 contacts of businesses that we speak to on a regular basis every week. We've been in contact with them too. So we're doing this here today, just to let everybody know it's about to be over. You need to apply. And if you need help, just contact us at SBS. We'll be able to help you.
I wanted to make a point that Commissioner Doris mentioned about the CDFIs. One of the issues that we found was that in the first batch, a vast majority of it didn't go to minority businesses or even really small businesses. And that's because the banks were turning them away. And so the second batch, there was like $60+ billion that was set aside specifically for the community development financial institutions. And so what I would do is, with my colleagues here, is encourage Congress to make sure that the reallocation of undistributed PPP dollars go to those institutions that will reach the small businesses and the minority-owned businesses. That has been the more popular channel to get to our MWBEs, and also so that the MWBEs will even get approved. I'm constantly working with Jonnel, Magali, Suzanne, Gregg, on how do we communicate. Every time they're doing a program, my office communicates it with the whole state with whatever emails I have. And certainly we're trying to leverage each other's resources, information, just like how we're doing now in city and state. Thank you.
So I want to chime in as well. Once we realized that the PPP loans existed or grants existed, what we did at the School Construction Authority with our mentor firm specifically, we sent out everything we received from SBS, all the information to all of our certified firms. We sent out everything from the Assembly Member Bichotte's office to our certified firms as well. But then we started to personally contact all of our mentor firms. and work with them individually. We have a loan program with a bank called Sterling Bank that will do our mental loans. So we work with Sterling to ensure that they will guarantee that our mentor firms would have the first right, that they will work with them and prioritize their applications. Then my team, we worked with all of our mentor firms, as many of them as we could, who was interested in participating in the program. And as a result, we got over 40 of our firms PPP loans totaling almost $4 million. And then we engaged our legal consultant to work with them to ensure that they remain grants, that they did the right thing so they will not then take on the burden of a loan and have to repay it. So we've been working with the firms who specifically applied and received these funds to ensure that they understood what they needed to do to ensure that they remained a grant and not become a loan. So this is what we've been doing at the SCA with our mentor firms, giving them that real one-on-one hand-holding guidance.
Thank you. Maggie, do you want to respond as well?
I think my colleagues have said everything that needs to be said.
Awesome. So I'm going to segue that into the next question, which is about Black-owned businesses and the closure rate. And so what we've seen is some of the statistics on Black-owned businesses closing twice as fast as white-owned businesses. And so what is the city doing to provide direct aid to support these Black-owned businesses?
So, you know, this issue is actually the issue that worries me the most, right? Because, you know, all the research shows that approximately 40% of Black businesses will not survive this pandemic. And in a place like New York City, where these businesses are the core of the community, it's really troubling. It's troubling to us at the mayor's office of MWBE, it's troubling to the mayor, it's troubling to this administration. In terms of what we can do, from my perspective, one of the best ways to support MWBEs, in this case, you know, Black-owned firms, is with a contract, is to ensure that they get work from the city. So the recent executive order, one of the directives was we're requiring agencies to use the MWBE discretionary spending to target MWBEs for all contracts under $500,000. You know, I said it in my opening response, and I'm going to say it again because this is such an incredible tool that we have. It's a powerful tool, and you know, and I want to thank Assembly Member Rodneyse Bichotte for championing this, and of course Jonnel, my predecessor, also. And this is something that we hold the agency's feet to the fire to make sure that they use it. And they can actually target the MWBEs that they spend the money on because it's discretionary. It could be, you know, neighborhood based, right? Because there are neighborhoods that have been more impacted by the virus than others. So that's an incredible tool. The other thing that we're also doing is, as a city, with the MWBE program, we have the ability to set what's called specified goals. So when you set an MWBE utilization goal on a contract, instead of setting a global goal of 30%, you can actually set a specific goal for Black-owned businesses. And we find, you know, in my former position at the Department of Design and Construction, we found that to be a really great tool because, you know, primes have, you know, they're comfortable to do business with the people that they're doing business with. We have to force their hand. So we have to set these specified goals if we want them to do business with Black firms. So we think that these are two very, very powerful tools that agencies have at their disposal. And we think that they will allow us to help Black businesses stay. And also we're working on a number of programs to help Black MBEs to develop their businesses. And, you know, perhaps Commissioner Doris can speak to some of those programs.
Thank you so much, Maggie. And by the way, for everyone listening and watching, we have two of the most amazing champions here on this panel for MBEs who ran programs at two of our largest spend agencies in the city. You know, so we've got the best of the best here. And, you know, with Maggie, what she was able to do at DDC and Suzanne at SCA, I think if you're an MWBE and you're hearing the insight that's come in, I think you want to take that. For us at SBS, we do a lot of business development, as many of you know. We develop our small businesses and give them the tools they need to actually compete and in our environment here in the city. Every MWBE that when we understood 65% of them had utilized one of our services. That means that what we're doing is really been successful in connecting them to the opportunity, but also growing their capacity, their business acumen, and also the ability for them to do and conduct business with the city. And so a part of the executive order, but there were several programs that the mayor also announced. One was, of course, expanding Black and Latino access to government contracts that Maggie talked about. But also, you know, we're developing a case management structure that proactively supports Black and Latino certified firms and present their capabilities to city agencies. So that's something that we've built, but we're adding and doubling down on that. We're also offering pro bono business consultants to our MWBEs, particularly our Black and brown firms, in order for them to participate. And then this, again, it's free of charge, business consultants, and we're going to be rolling that out pretty soon. And also, finally, we will be establishing the Black and Latinx mentorship program. As you heard, mentorship is key, and that's many things that just sort of aligned with that we need to do. Mentorship as in how to do business and how much should I even take on as a business owner? How can I be helped with my back office? The networks that you need to have as a business owner and the insight that you need in order to give you the tools and the little nuggets to help you get over the hump when it comes to preparing you for utilization, knowing with city contracts where it's B2G, business to government, but B2B, business to business, or B2C, business to customer. And so part of our work, we'll continue to do that at SBS to help these small Black-owned businesses. And also the funds that we have put out, we've put out a employee retention grant and also a small business loan. Most of that money, and also our emergency grant program, all of that, most of that, about over 60% of it went to minority firms, and a significant portion of that to Black firms. So, we are putting our money where our mouth is, but certainly there's a huge challenges continue to be out there for these firms, but we're here to help them get through that.
Awesome. And I think someone is going to drop some of that contact information in the chat as we go along, and there will be more resources that will come out as a response after our call is completed as well, so that people know who to contact in order to take advantage of those resources. And so that segues into another question as well regarding the 15% pledge. The 15% pledge is now almost at 1 million signatures. And so is the city going to adopt the 15% pledge? Don't all speak at once.
The 15% pledge is calling major corporations to commit 15% of their products they stock that come from Black-owned businesses. Well, I would say this, the mayor's put out a 30% goal utilization. And that's just a part of what the city is pledged to do. So I think that is it's sort of aligned with $25 billion goal, and Maggie could talk a little about that, that we've put out. So we're committed to that. I think from a standpoint of how do we help grow and build the universe of possible contracts and opportunities for Black-owned businesses, we absolutely support this. As I came into SBS commissioner, there are three really major principles that I'm building this on. One is around innovation. We've got to innovate as businesses, as an agency. Innovation is key. And in the new world order that we're in right now, you've got to be innovative and creative in how you approach business. The second is around adaptability. You've got to be adaptable. We need flexible businesses that can actually meet the needs of the new world we're in, but also be adaptable so they're able to pivot and be able to survive. And we're helping businesses do that. But the third one is around collaboration, and collaboration is key. We cannot do business in isolation. That's large businesses and small businesses. That's businesses that do business with the government, and that's businesses that only do business with the private sector. And I think this sort of paint, the 15% pledge helps paint that reality that we're all sort of reliant on each other. And we can't do business like we used to do it. And so, look, as Small Business Commissioner, we are doing that right here, right? We're taking this opportunity to advocate for our Black businesses, for our Latino businesses, for all the MWBEs, to make sure that they have a seat at the table and that they're getting the chance to really perform for the city. This is part of my life works, and as I'm here at SBS, that's what we'll continue to do. But we want to say, like, the public-private partnership model is critical right now, in particular, and collaboration is a key principle for business recovery and business strategy going forward. That is critical, and we have to make sure that we sort of utilize that and emphasize that as much as possible.
Okay, awesome. And I want to also mention that the 30% participation goal is for all MWBEs, which goes back to all of the categories, which is Asian, Hispanic, Black, and everyone's sort of lumped in together. And so the question is about increasing goals specifically for Black and African American categories. And Suzanne, I want to ask about your agency's record in that respect.
So 15%, well, our record, what we've realized, and I'll be honest, that Blacks and Hispanics do not fare as well as maybe Asian, Indians, and white women when it comes to across the board. So what we did several years ago was, because we realized that, and Black and Hispanics numbers were extremely low, we decided that the best place to bring in more Black and Hispanics and to groom them, to give them that one-on-one, was through our mentor program. So we did a massive outreach specifically to more Black and Latinx communities to bring in more of them. We had a massive AC initiative program going on. So we did a huge outreach to more Black and Latinx electrical firms, because within our mentor program, if you truly want to get rich, that's where you get rich. It's through those type of trades, because we were doing so many of those projects. So we did a huge push. And what I can tell you basically over the last 5 years, in our mentor program, Blacks were 39%, and that was over almost $136 million within the last 5-year plan. Hispanics did, within the mentor program, 11%, which was like almost 39 million. So what we realized was that once we worked with them through the mentor program, they then seamlessly moved into our larger open market program. And over the last 5-year plan, Blacks in our open market went from 0%, so just think of that, 0%. They were not bidding open market, and they were not winning open market. So within the last 5-year plan, because of our target with the mentor program, and I think these numbers are gonna increase even more significantly, Blacks increase, and now they're doing in our CIP, they're doing almost 2%, but that's $34 million. And that's within a 5-year period of us targeting the mentor program, which means I intend to see those numbers increase even more significantly as we move forward within this targeted type of training and resources built, just looking at those areas or the firms that were falling behind and working specifically with them. In our, this is prime contracts. In our subcontracting goals, Blacks do about 15.3%. So over the last 5 years, that was almost 238 million. So we are targeting them when we work with our large GCs. It is quite, so I guess we achieved the 15% pledge when it comes to subcontracts, because then we have more control. We can't control who wins the prime contract, but we can significantly control who they participate, who the GCs work with. so we can work with them to ensure that there's a huge amount of diversity on their teams. So we do work with that. And so within the last 5 years, Blacks did about 15%. Professional services, one of the big things with professional service contracts is the SCA, the selection committee, there's always a representative from my department on every selection committee. That ensures equity, that ensures that minority firms are given a fair area to participate, and we vote like everyone else, and we get a chance to voice our opinions. So in professional services, Blacks are about 11% over the last 5 years, which is about 36.8 million. So we're doing a lot to encourage Black and Hispanic participation. I know we need to do a little more, but you have to start small. The small is our mentor program, where they are doing the majority of their work, and we're grooming them to move to the next level, and have seen success thus far.
Okay, and that's fabulous, and it's good to see that you're moving closer to certainly up from 0, but closer to 25%, which would represent the actual population in New York City. And I want to segue into it, and you did also touch on another point about selection committees, but I want to come back to that question. I want to ask Maggie and the Assembly member about the New York Forward Loan Fund. And what is the status of the New York Forward Loan Fund? How much of this money went to NYC MWBEs?
Actually, I think Commissioner Doris can address that.
Yeah, that's his baby.
Okay.
So point of clarification, not my baby. This is a state program. We do not manage that, and we do not have the information. The state does not release that. That fund was, I think, $100 million, and that fund was developed by the governor and the state to help small businesses who did not get a PPP or EIDL loan. But my understanding, it's not been reported out. The city does not run that fund. But here's what I think is a good thing about it. It's another opportunity for those small businesses to get a loan. If you didn't get a loan from the federal government, that you can get a loan to help you with your operation expenses, etc. But we haven't seen any reporting yet on that fund, but we do help connect small businesses to that fund, if they have issues with the application process, etc. But it's a state product.
Yeah, and just to support Commissioner Doris, we have not, and the purpose of the fund was obviously because there was just a high rejection rate of banks not offering any type of capital to a lot of the MWBEs. So we certainly will look to the governor to give us a report at ESD, Empire State Development Corporation.
Okay, fabulous. So I'm going to skip over to some city stuff then. Last week we heard about the mayor's executive order to support MWBEs. What are some of the immediate ways that MWBEs will benefit from this new legislation?
So this is in my wheelhouse.
Okay, let's go.
So I'm going to go back and say the genesis of this executive order was, so I was appointed in May, I came on board in June, and the financial state of the city when I came on board, and just brainstorming ways that we can really impact MWBE's ability to successfully do business with the city while basically we have a budget shortfall, right? What can we do? So what I thought was, and this was the benefit of being at the agency level, I understood a number of long-standing structural barriers that MWBEs have, and they shared with me when I was in my former position, as well as some of the new challenges caused by the pandemic. And so we thought these were the issues that we were going to address, right? So the directive, as executed last week, is focused on ensuring that agencies succeed by mandating executive leadership of the MWBE program. And I saw, you know, and best practices tell you that the kind of work that we do, and Commissioner Doris can attest to that, Suzanne can attest to it, is it really requires intentionality. This is not something that comes about organically. It needs somebody who leads the work every single day and somebody who actually is in the executive suite, reports directly to the commissioner head. And that was one of the things that I felt like was successful at DDC, and I thought every agency in the city should have that, because while we do have fantastic people who work on MWBEs at the agencies, but it doesn't bubble up, the issues don't bubble up to the agency head. And when they don't bubble up to the agency head, it's really ineffective, nothing happens. So we felt that that was one important thing, and it was a quick way to make sure that there was a high level person who's working on MWBEs at every agency. And we also felt that we should broaden the pool of contracts that MWBEs are eligible to bid on. So historically, emergency contracts are not contracts that agencies have set goals on. It's not because they're forbidden from setting goals, it's because it's exempt from the goal setting process. So we had to go back and say to agencies, you're not forbidden from setting goals, so why are you not setting goals? And, you know, and we understand that there's some emergency contracts that are true emergencies, right? Like in the beginning of the pandemic, there are some things that we had to do very, very quickly, and we had to turn around very quickly. At this point, there are some quote unquote emergency contracts that we do know are expiring, and we have the luxury of time to make sure that we do the search. Can we get MWBEs to bid on it? Can we get a quote from an MWBE? Why are we not setting goals on this? So this is what the executive order is doing. It really is creating more opportunities for MWBEs. While we can't say, you know, this contract goes to an MWBE, what we can do is we can cultivate the ecosystem to make sure that MWBEs have a fair chance of being part of that process.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Ms. Austin said about the emergency contract process. So there was an issue where with the pandemic and the state of emergency, pretty much all the opportunities for MWBEs to bid on something or subcontract went out the window, because a lot of these firms just felt that they didn't have to abide by the typical or the regular procurement process. That was a problem. When I saw this executive order, I was very thankful for it, because it still incorporated the discretionary spend of $500,000, which gives, you know, the mayor wiggle room, right, to pick these MWBEs, you know, because I think right now that is probably the only way, right? With the emergency procurement contracts, it's hard. It's hard. You know, I think I commend you, Magali, for actually making sure that these vendors would abide by the 30% or the goal, whatever the goal is for that particular job. But you know, it also leaves room for, I don't know, lawsuits, right? They can go and say, oh, this is against the Constitution, whatever. You can't make me do this 30%. This is an emergency. And so we have this discretionary spend, which is by law, which you all can choose your vendors to do that particular work. So I was very happy to see the executive order. Very, very happy. And I commend you, you know, coming into this role very quickly as the chief advisor in the MWBE. What's the title that they gave you?
Senior advisor to the mayor.
New York, right, okay, New York advisor to the mayor. It's not the chief advisor, okay. The New York advisor to the mayor on MWBE. It's just, it's perfect because that was an issue that we had to address. So we thank you for that. And however we can send people your way in terms of exercising that opportunity to get picked for discretionary spend, that would be great.
Well, thank you so much, member. I also wanted to mention the last aspect of the executive order is basically we're doing a lot of work with non-mayoral agencies, specifically NYCHA, Health and Hospitals, and DOE, who have significant procurement budgets. While they're not required under local law 1 they're not part of local law 1, we felt that it was really important to make sure that they're optimizing their MWBE spend because, you know, money that they spend with MWBEs goes to MWBEs and it goes to minority communities. So I think that was a really important aspect also.
Does anyone else want to comment on the executive order and how this will impact how your office services MWBEs? If not, I think we've rolled over into the Q&A session. We've got 10 minutes left. Is that right, Gregg?
That is correct. So if you want to read off some of the questions from the audience, you can, or if we covered everything, then we can start closing out. Okay, I definitely see a few questions coming on the chat. I have one question about Latina and women-owned businesses. Interesting in starting a business. How do I go about finding out what is most needed and how to get government grants for women-owned businesses?
So the best place to, I think, start is SBS. We service our small businesses and connect them to opportunity. And so you can certainly reach us through our website or our hotline that we have now. We'll put it up in the chat for you, all those contact information, but certainly we are here to help you do that and connect you to those opportunities and to grants and financial assistance and support that you need.
Awesome. And also, we know that many service type businesses like hair salons and barbershops have had to close. What kind of aid money might be coming to these businesses which will allow them to pivot and offer new services while we continue to endure these shutdowns?
Yeah, I would say again, I mean, part of the challenge is, when you're dealing with, lack of funding, at the city level, again, we look to where there is funding. So there's funding at the state, there's funding at the federal government. And again, if you're a business and you need that support, if you're a barbershop, beauty salon, et cetera, we're happy to connect you with those opportunities that we know are out there. Again, you can call us at SBS4NYC 888, SBS4NYC. That's our number, our hotline, and we will work with you. We've done this with about 4,500 or so firms so far. Happy to help and assist you all as well in this process.
Okay, another question. NYC has an extremely poor record of doing business with Black-owned firms. Will goals be sufficient to change that, or would incentives and/or rewards also help?
Well, I have to tell you, so the research does show that incentives work. At this point, that's not something that we're prepared to do it as a city, only because that increases costs, right? Because if you have to incentivize. I mean, my sense is that what we need to do is we really need to make sure that the people who are working on our contracts, our prime contractors, are meeting their contractual obligations. Because when you agree to take on a project that has a set goal, it's a contractual obligation. So At this point, that's what we're really focusing on, is making sure that the projects that we have in place, the goals that we have in place are effective. And, you know, and maybe at some point we'll explore incentivizing. And also sure that Black MWBEs are primed so that their fate is in their own hands. They're not working as subcontractors.
Absolutely. Next question is, what measures are being set in place to combat normal firms from incorporating their wives, sisters, and taking advantage of MWBE contracts? MWBE contracts aren't designed to get people rich, yet are we guaranteeing the profit margins remain attractive instead of giving people the scraps?
Yeah, you know, first, I think the question is around our certification process. And I think it's important to note that we are very diligent about that process. We make sure that we verify, you know, everyone who is putting themselves down as a particular ethnic group, that we need that evidence. And I know some of our firms look very puzzled to us when we ask for evidence, and that you can maybe look at someone and think and say within that they probably meet the criteria, but we ask for actual evidence. And we do of course, monitoring of this process. We have on-site visits to make sure that it's not just, you know, firms who are in name only, but there's ownership and control and management. And so that the day-to-day operations are being managed by whomever is putting forth as the person in charge of that business. So our certification process is set up to ensure that, and we double down on when we see the percentages are real tight, you know, 49, 51. I mean, that, you know, and the like, we are very much careful with that. We do additional, you know, checks there, and Commissioner Bishop know what I'm talking about. We go over, above and beyond with those particular firms to make sure that it is suited for what they're presenting themselves to be. And I think that's absolutely critical. And then on profitability, I would just say that, you look, I mean, we are city government. There's a challenge there when it comes to, you know, spending taxpayers' dollars in a way that, you know, makes sense, and it's not exploitive or just costs too much. That's all our money, and we have to be careful. But there's an opportunity to make money and to be viable as a business, and we don't want to shut that down either. And so, for instance, the best value provision that we got passed in Albany last year, as we implement that this year, it not only looks at price, but it looks at who brings the best value to the table. And I think those are the types of tools that we were able to get in our legislation that now this year, as we begin to implement those things, we'll start to see those results.
Okay, thank you. Another question is there a dashboard where we can keep track of how the city actually distributes the funds? Are they Black-owned businesses or just minority-owned businesses? First thought that comes to mind is Checkbook NYC, but perhaps there's another resource that I'm not thinking about.
Yeah, you're right. The controller has the checkbook, and that's a place to go to check, you know, contract spend. MOX, the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, also has the information on contract awards. They publish a report every quarter, and they also have ethnicity and gender data. So those are the two places that I can think of that information can be found.
I would just like to add, on the state level, ESD also puts a report. It's not as, you know, broken down as the city, but they also have a report on the breakdown of the percentage of contracts that were awarded to the entire population.
So,
okay, go ahead.
You want to close out?
Well, that's all I was just going to say. If anybody has a last minute, 30-second commercial that you want to spout, this is the time to do it.
The only thing, ladies, my colleagues, I don't know if they want to go first. I don't want to jump ahead. Please.
30 seconds.
Okay, I'll go. Again, my name is Assemblymember Rodneyse Bichotte. If you are interested in any information on MWBE from a legislative standpoint, and also upcoming events and resources, certainly look for me, Rodneyse Bichotte, rodneysebichotte.net, or just Google me, Rodneyse Bichotte. My number is 718-940-0428, 718-940-0428, and rbichotte@gmail.com. Thank you.
I just want to thank everyone today, and thank you, City and State, and all of my, all of the participants here on this panel. All of you guys are great. Assemblywoman, you've always done right by the SCA. Jonnel, we work very well together. Gregg, it's great to see you. Maggie, we're like sisters. we share this. We've shared the same agency head for quite some time. I just want to remind everyone that the SCA is actively looking for sites. So if you know of a site that will be great for a classroom or for daycares, we are looking for sites. Go on our website if you know of anything, if you want to recommend anything, nycsca.org. Look under real estate and submit a site, and we will definitely come out, check it out, and get back to you if it's something that's viable. If you want our kids back to school safely, this is what we're doing right now. Thank you.
So I want to thank my co-panelists, Jonnel, Suzanne and I worked in the same building and shared the same commissioner. So I really miss being at DDC. And former Commissioner Gregg Bishop and the Assembly member who is such a champion for MWBEs. I want to thank everybody who's also watching. And I also want to remind everybody that the Mayor's Office of MWBE as well as SBS are incredible resources for you, minority-owned businesses. And I think, you know, one of the things that I encourage people to do is to really use us. Reach out to us, use us where we have a lot of knowledge and we have amazing staff that can support you.
I just want to say again, just like everybody else, thank you for the opportunity, City and State. Kenya, thank you. Gregg, my friend, thank you. Such a leader and continues to be. Assembly member, thank you for everything. And Suzanne and Maggie just hit the ground running, doing her thing. So I'm so happy and proud. We've got champions. This is what I want to say. You've got champions here at the city and the state to help you as a firm to get where you need to go. If you want to help, further help and assistance from SBS, you can connect with us at nyc.gov/business. All the resources, particularly with the pandemic and all the challenges that you face, and we right there, everything is there for you. And of course, our hotline at SBS 4NYC, 888 SBS 4NYC. We're happy to assist you further. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. And of course, I just want to thank Kiana Beckles, of the CEO of Leverage Assessment, for doing a fine job in moderating this very important panel. So thank you everyone for joining us. If you have been with us since 1 p.m., you heard some dynamic speakers. You heard a lot of things, and some of the things in terms of intentionality on how we can actually address economic and social equity. You heard about advocacy, and you heard about participation. The last thing I would say is that in terms of participation, remember, the census in New York City is still lagging behind the nation. We were about 52% in terms of our response rate. And the deadline has been moved up. So it's important that everyone who's still on this call understand how important it is to fill out the census. For every 1% that we missed, it's about $7 million. So you can imagine, as we talked about building schools, we talked about hospitals, we talked about a number of things, those resources are very important. And of course, it's important that everyone registers to vote this year. It's going to be very important. So I just want to thank, and of course, as everyone has thanked, I want to thank City and State for giving me the opportunity to try my new role as a host. We want to thank all our sponsors. So I want to thank New York City School Construction Authority, TD Bank, and Leverage Assessments. And of course, we want to thank everyone for coming, engaging with our dynamic speakers. I want to thank all our panelists for the great conversation. And we hope that we'll see you at our next event on Thursday, August 6th at 10 a.m. AARP New York presents Buffalo Region Virtual State Legislative Forum. And finally, we have our 2020 Virtual Education Summit at 1 p.m. on Tuesday, August 18th. Registration, of course, is always free and can be found on our website, the City and State website. So thank you everyone for coming. The sun is now out. Hopefully everyone remains safe through this storm. But that is a metaphor that, that the sun shall rise and shine on this equity problem. And now is the moment for us to take advantage of that. So thank you everyone and have a great afternoon.